Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up this hour, it's just sick. The mother of a sick child at hospital challenges the health secretary as he visits over the staffing situation in the NHS. Also coming up, the government's Rwanda policy ruled legal at the High Court. We'll have all the reaction coming in, and Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, making a statement to the Commons later. Mark White, too, with this exclusive report on the tragedy in the English Channel. Now being hailed as the greatest World Cup final ever, Argentina triumph over France in that nail-biting penalty shootout. Our man in Qatar has been with all the fans, both celebrating and commiserating. And let us know what you think about the issues of the day. Email us as ever at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But time now for the latest headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. It's just 1 minute past 12. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says she's committed to making the plan to send migrants to Rwanda work after the High Court judges ruled the government's policy is legal. The Royal Courts of Justice ruled the policy sending asylum seekers who come to the UK illegally to claim asylum in Rwanda is consistent with the International Refugee Convention. The government has faced legal challenges which has prevented any flights from taking off so far. Charities have vowed to appeal today's decision, claiming the East African nation lacks a fair and efficient asylum system. The skipper of the fishing boat, which helped rescue dozens of migrants from the Channel last week, has criticised UK immigration policy for making the tragedy inevitable. The government say they have a legal duty to pick up anyone in distress in the Channel. The skipper, Raymond Strachan, told GB News British authorities have been acting as a migrant taxi service, encouraging ever-increasing numbers of people to make the journey.
Then you get the UK government saying they're getting sent patrol boats out to stop the crossings. Well, I see the patrol boats there, but I just see them like a taxi service. That's what it is.
The mother of a 3-year-old girl has criticised the Health Secretary on the eve of a nationwide nurses' strike. The Nurses' Union has threatened further industrial action in the new year if ministers don't respond to their demands within 48 hours of tomorrow's walkout. Steve Barclay says he's open to talks with Unite ahead of strike action, but suggested the government won't budge on pay. The mother told Mr Barclay at a hospital in South London it's unfair to blame resourcing issues on the pandemic.
We had problems in the NHS before we went into the pandemic. We were short of doctors, we were short of beds going into the pandemic. So I think it's really wrong to blame it on the pandemic. And actually, the damage that you're doing to families like myself is terrible.
The Health Secretary says he's keen to work with the unions to address the range of concerns that matter to staff, but says they must provide sufficient emergency cover to protect patients.
We need to focus on patients and addressing the backlogs that we have, particularly the waiting list for operations as a result of the pandemic. And that's why it's important that we work together, and I'm very keen to continue those talks with the RCN and other trade unions so we can mitigate any impact on patient safety.
The Prime Minister has called on Northern European allies to stand firm in their support of Ukraine. Rishi Sunak touched down in Latvia this morning and has told fellow leaders it's an incredibly important time for the Defence Alliance to come together. Mr Sunak will travel to Estonia later today to meet with British troops. It comes as the UK announced a £250 million contract of fresh ammunition as part of its defensive aid package for 2023. More than 130 bus companies are going to cap single fares with the aim of helping passengers with the rising cost of living. National Express and Stagecoach are among the companies which will introduce the £2 upper limit for fares in England outside of London from next year. It's aimed to help people who are travelling for work, education and medical appointments. The scheme's being backed with £60 million worth of government funding. 20 million cars are estimated to hit the motorways this week as people travel to see family over Christmas. The RAC says traffic will be especially bad this Friday and Saturday, made worse by the ongoing wave of strikes across rail services. Thousands of RMT members will walk out from 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve until the 27th of December. The RAC is predicting almost 8 million journeys will be made over the 2 days before Christmas Day. Elon Musk could step down as the chief executive of Twitter. In a poll, he asked the public whether they think he should stand down. 57% of more than 70 million voters said yes. Musk said he'd honour the result. He's faced criticism since taking over the platform, including around his decisions over content moderation. You're up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed for that. So, Health Secretary Steve Barclay confronted by the mother of a sick child on a visit to a hospital just a day, of course, before the next nurses' strike and further walkouts by ambulance workers due later this week too. Well, the Health Secretary was visiting King's College University Hospital in London when he met the mother of a three-year-old girl with cystic fibrosis. This is what Sarah Pennington-Old said about the care of her daughter Lucy.
We have some brilliant experts, and they're being worked to the bone, you know, and actually the level of care they provide is amazing, but they're not being able to provide it in the way they want to provide it because the resourcing is not there, you know. Like I said, on Monday we were due to be in, and the number of people coming through the door is too many, and it's not fair to blame it on the pandemic anymore, is it? Because actually we had problems in the NHS before we went into the pandemic. We were short of doctors, we were short of beds going into the pandemic. So I think it's really wrong to blame it on the pandemic. And actually, the damage that you're doing to families like myself is terrible.
Well, no response at that stage from the Health Secretary, but Steve Barclay then spoke after the visit to the London hospital, encouraging the unions to get back to talks in the interests of patients, but added once again the 19% pay demand unreasonable, he said.
Well, I deeply regret the disruption to patients. We've accepted in full the independent pay review body recommendations, and I think it's important now that the trade unions do likewise. Well, I don't think a 19% pay rise at a time when many of your viewers are already facing cost of living pressures is reasonable. We have an independent process that looks at the challenges on pay and what is affordable and what is right for the NHS, and that independent process has made recommendations, and we've accepted those recommendations in full. And of course that comes on top of prioritising the NHS last year at a time when other public sector workers had a pay freeze, and we prioritised the NHS with a 3% pay rise.
Well, let's get more reaction now with our political reporter Olivia Utley joining us in the studio. Olivia, more of the, should we say, mantra from Number 10 about the 19% figure in particular, but a very different picture being outlined there by that mother in the hospital, and not much reaction from the Health Secretary at that stage.
No, there's now huge pressure on Steve Barclay, and he is now, it seems, getting very worried about what failure would say about him and his tenure as Health Secretary. So we're hearing this morning that he is keen to reopen conversations with Pat Cullen, but he's essentially being given very, very little wiggle room from Rishi Sunak, who has apparently ruled out the idea of a one-off pay rise for nurses, which is what happened in Scotland, which would put an end to a fresh wave of strikes. And that might be what Steve Barclay would like to do. That might be why he's keen to reopen these conversations. But he doesn't really have much wiggle room from Number 10, and he is feeling the flack himself personally. And of course, at the same time, he's trying to deal with the ambulance strikes, which do take place later in the week, which actually sound like they're going to be even more destructive than these nurses' strikes are going to be. I mean, psychologically, the nurses' strikes are pretty terrifying, but in terms of actual damage to real patients, it's these ambulance strikes where not even a minimum level of service is going to be maintained, which is what's really, really worrying him. But he's feeling the pressure from all sides here.
Yeah, and they're still trying to assess what the urgent care would be from these ambulance crews in different sort of health areas across Britain. I mean, the other aspect to this is that we keep being told, well, the army's going to come in, they're being prepared and so on. It's interesting that the army itself, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, actually, who's overseeing all the armed forces, we're not spare capacity, we're busy, we've got to focus on our primary role. Plus the fact that 2,500 troops in public services will cost the government £10 million a week. One wonders how many nurses one could buy with that.
Yes, and it's sort of often suggested as, you know, the silver bullet solution, just get the army and the army will fix it. Another statistic which I had last week was that there are only about 40 fully trained paramedics in the army who could be drafted in at this stage to fill in for nurses. The other issue, which isn't mentioned there but is also very pressing, is that there are plenty of young soldiers in the army who are deeply unhappy about the idea that they're going to be called and ruin their Christmases to go and cover for nurses who are often paid more than
the troops are, yeah.
So you could end up quite soon with a situation where the army too are demanding pay rises, though of course they can't strike.
Now, the other part of this jigsaw is that there's been much made of the Independent Pay Review Board, and we've got the RCN and other unions saying this is not an independent pay board. The government effectively oversees it, controls it, and decides its remit. So, I mean, would that be one way of moving the whole issue on?
Yeah, that seems like it would be one way of moving the issue on, but as you say, it doesn't seem completely independent. Then you've also got sort of ACAS has just disappeared. We used to talk about, you know, the moderator, someone coming between the two. They don't seem to be playing a very big part in these negotiations. So what you've got instead is just two sides who are very firmly entrenched in their views and have a very bad relationship with each other.
Yes, it's sour, doesn't it?
Yes,
yeah.
So Steve Barclay was taken on for the role as Health Secretary because he's known to be a bit of a bruiser, a political heavyweight. He's not afraid to pick fights. He was the Brexit Secretary, of course, and is known as someone who's, you know, willing to go up against anyone, which is useful in a Health Secretary. You do need someone sort of strong. But in this situation, he hasn't sort of struck a conciliatory tone at all. And now the relationship between him and Pat Cullen has pretty much broken down. When she talks about him, she can barely bring herself to be sort of civil about him, which is a pretty extreme situation to have reached. And it does seem difficult to imagine a way that we can get through this in a way that could avoid a fresh wave of strikes in January.
Yeah, and any victory for the government might be Pyrrhic as well, and bearing in mind this. But we shall see in those days ahead. For the moment, Olivia, thank you very much indeed for that. But there has been one victory for the government because its policy to send illegal immigrants to Rwanda is lawful, the High Court has decided this morning. Well, since the plan was originally announced back in April, you remember, there have been challenges by charities and campaign groups arguing that the East African nation is not safe for asylum seekers. However, High Court judges deciding the policy is consistent with the International Refugee Convention. And, of course, it comes as the government being criticised, too, for failing to consider the worsening crisis in Rwanda as it seeks to deport the asylum seekers. Well, in response to the ruling, Home Secretary Suella Braverman has said in the last half hour, a groundbreaking migration partnership with Rwanda will provide individuals relocated with support to build new lives there, while disrupting the business model of people smuggling gangs, putting lives at risk through dangerous and illegal small boat crossings. Well, let's get the thoughts once more of our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's been sort of following this story at the sharp end at Dover with the pictures we saw of that latest tragedy in the Channel last week. We're expecting to hear from the Home Secretary with a statement at 3:30 in the Commons. However, she's made her position pretty clear. Does this mean that the planes will be on the runway fairly shortly, attempting to get people out to Rwanda?
Well, it depends. Many supporters of this policy will be saying, yes, get on with it. Let's get this process in train. In fact, you know, there will be an appeal. I think there's no doubt about that. But in the meantime, it's lawful, according to the High Court. It is in line with the UN Refugee Convention. So get on with it. I mean, what the High Court did rule, though, was that although the policy was lawful, the way it was being implemented was not necessarily lawful, in that those who were being put on this plane bound for Rwanda were not properly considered in terms of whether they should have been on the plane or not.
Right, so that was 8 individuals. So
individuals who were part of this claim that was taken to the High Court.
So we've got the situation where there may be now a reference to the Court of Appeal on the whole picture. But in terms of the individuals, an indication perhaps that the legal bodies could actually approach any kind of appeal on an individual basis and tie up the courts for months.
Yeah, potentially, and that would be very messy. I mean, what the High Court is not saying that those 8 individuals should not go to Rwanda. It's just saying that the decision to send them to Rwanda has not been properly considered. They haven't looked into the background and whether there are any extenuating circumstances which prevent them from being sent to Rwanda. So they should be properly considered in a proper process before then being put on that flight to Rwanda.
And how prepared is Rwanda for this? Because Labour criticised the whole issue in the fact that they said that really they could only process 200 people a year. That was Yvette Cooper's assertion.
Yeah, but this was always going to be a process that would be ramped up. So initially, accommodation is provided for a few hundred people. £120 million has been given to the Rwanda government to help provide that, to help provide proper services and personnel to examine refugee claims, and then to provide them an avenue into Rwandan civil society in the workplace and the like. It's a few hundred initially, but the government's intention was always that that number would increase. They want this to act as a deterrent. They know that just sending 200 or 300 people is not going to do that. 45,000 people have come this year alone.
Yeah, and you've been reporting, of course, on the latest boats. We've got your report coming up fairly shortly with the skipper of that fishing boat criticising government policy, which is interesting in itself. Mark, for the moment, thank you for that. But let's get the thoughts now of Steve Valdez-Simons, Refugee and Asylum Rights Director at Amnesty International. Thanks for joining us once more, Steve. First, your reaction to what the High Court's decided.
Well, it's a gravely disappointing decision from Amnesty's perspective. We're extremely concerned about the prospect of people being expelled to Rwanda. We note that the court has not licensed any particular expulsion of any person as yet, and the government is in the position of having to properly consider certainly the 8 cases that are before it, and the other cases that it has put forward have not been fully considered by any court as yet.
Yeah, in fact, I think the court went a bit further in saying that the government had acted wrongly in those 8 individual cases. We haven't got the explanation of that as such. But where does this leave you and these other groups who've been taking these legal steps? I mean, you have got the Court of Appeal, I guess, now as the next step. Are you considering that?
Well, to be clear, Amnesty International is not one of the parties to these proceedings, although we strongly support them.
Yeah.
I am sure that lawyers involved for the individuals or for the wider claimants will be considering whether to take the matter on appeal. It may even be that the government is considering that in respect of the 8 particular claims that it has lost. So it may well be that we see applications for permission to appeal to the Court of Appeal and the Court of Appeal having to decide the matter next year sometime. But as it stands, as you've reported, in principle, the court has found UK law permits this. In practice, it's found the government has not yet, on its face, implemented a means of doing so that is lawful.
So where is the gap, do you think? What's the problem in terms of the court clearly deciding that Rwanda would be a fit place for them to be taken to, but it seems the processing is at fault as far as their investigations have shown?
Well, I want to be a little bit careful because I acknowledge that this is a judgment of 140 pages and I have not read every word as yet.
Yeah.
But on its face, what the court has decided is that as a general matter of law, the idea that nobody could be expelled to Rwanda under this arrangement is not going to succeed as far as the court is concerned. Whether any individual on their own specific facts should or could lawfully be expelled, well, that will depend on each individual's facts, and the government will have to determine that properly. And thus far, at least with these 8, the court seems to have found that it has not done so.
The other issue, and we will be showing Mark White's report fairly shortly, the skipper of this boat that rescued the people from the water, 4 died, of course, but some 80 plus were actually saved, has criticised government policy in intimating to people that they can attempt to make these crossings. Do you accept that there is still a widespread assessment that government policy on that is wrong, that we should be physically stopping people from leaving the beaches of France?
I think that the more that governments, the UK and the French, and they've been doing this for a long time, the more that is put into simply stopping people making journeys, rather than providing them the means to not need to make the journey, either finding safety in France or finding a safe way of getting to the UK. The more we just go down the way we're going at the moment, the more dangerous the journeys are going to get, the more out of sight they are going to be attempted, and the more lives that will be put at risk.
Steve Alder-Simons, as ever, thank you for bringing us your reaction here on GB News. And, of course, we'll see what emerges with Suella Braverman making that statement this afternoon at 3:30. Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, we've got Mark White's report coming up for you as well on the reaction to that tragedy in the Channel. Also coming up, Rishi Sunak in the Baltic states trying to reassure them on Britain's commitment to European security. And that exclusive report with the skipper rescuing so many migrants. Before that, though, we'll take a short break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the Prime Minister is using a trip to the Baltic states to urge fellow leaders in Europe to stand firm over Ukraine. He's promised more defensive aid to guard against Russian aggression. In Latvia, Rishi Sunak calling on his counterparts to sustain or even boost their current support. The Prime Minister also travelling to Estonia to meet British troops there and sign a new technology digital partnership. Well, our political correspondent Tom Harwood is here in the studio. Not just technology, it seems, but hardware as well. £250 million of various bits of artillery, ammunition and hardware. I mean, they're quite serious about this.
They are serious, and of course Rishi Sunak is facing some claims from here in the United Kingdom, as we read over the weekend, that he was asking for some sort of audit of support, that maybe he was taking a more technocratic approach than the Boris Johnson sort of throw everything at it approach. I think this trip, to some extent, is about pushing back against that characterisation of Rishi Sunak being more of a penny pincher, talking about providing the support that Ukraine needs as the war develops, perhaps looking at more aggressive sort of equipment that Ukraine has been asking for, the ability to push back the Russian troops rather than just hold their ground.
Yeah, the real problem, of course, for all the Western nations and NATO is what they provide, in that Russia has indicated if there's anything deemed offensive weaponry that can actually hit Russia itself, then that will change the entire sort of nature of Russia's approach to this.
Well, this was the worry at the start of the war, but I think to some extent we're seeing from certain Western countries a bit more willingness to go down that route than we did several months ago, particularly because now it seems that the Ukrainians have actually made some fairly impressive gains, particularly as it seems that the Ukrainians are with a real chance of taking back territory, not just that Russia snatched in the last 6 months or so, but took back in 2014, of course, at the annexation of Crimea. That's very much on the sights of the Ukrainians. But it's fascinating, this JEF meeting, 10 nations...
This is the Joint Expeditionary Force, which sounds, pretty militaristic, doesn't it?
It does. It was established by the United Kingdom. It's a UK-led force that was established back in 2014 as sort of the Afghan war was winding down. We focused more on Europe and particularly uniting sort of behind the United Kingdom these northern European countries. This is Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, these countries sort of uniting and securing the peace and prosperity of Northern Europe. But in particular, it's interesting, two of these countries that are in the JEF have just applied to join NATO. This has, to some extent, been a bit of a bridge to allow Sweden and indeed Finland,
which neighbours Russia.
Past.
And of course, this has really blown up, if you pardon the pun, in Putin's face, because he was obviously trying to isolate those countries by threatening all sorts of things if they joined NATO. But the other aspect to this is how the Ukrainians are suffering. I mean, clearly Russia has weaponised attacks on the energy infrastructure. And we've had Zelensky say, look, you need to give us air support to try and knock these drones out the sky, because they are really trying to sort of put us back into the darkness.
And there have been some ground-to-air missile sort of supplies that have been given, but President Zelensky has been speaking at the opening of this meeting in Estonia. Just in the last few minutes, he appeared by video link and, of course, was there with the Prime Minister of Estonia and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, sort of leading the opening to this meeting, very much at the forefront of the minds of all of these world leaders.
But not that personal link that he had with Boris Johnson.
Yes, it does seem that that was a very unique sort of relationship. I'm not sure that many streets in Ukraine are going to be named after Rishi Sunak anytime soon, but this isn't the end of Rishi Sunak's sort of itinerary in the Baltic states. After this, he's off one sort of country north. He's going to both Latvia and Estonia today, and he'll be having more bilateral meetings throughout the day.
And in terms of other support, I mean, we can see him speaking there with Zelensky. He was asking for even things like generators just to try and keep the lights on. Do we know how much sort of kit has been sent from Britain to help them?
Whenever we ask Number 10 or the Ministry of Defence about specifics of kit, they're reticent to say the details.
Right.
Now, there is, of course, a security element to that. We don't want to be telling the Russians exactly what bits of kit and how many. And so I think that, to some extent, this stuff will come out later down the line. But we do know that £2.3 billion of equipment and support has been sent to the Ukrainians over the course of this war.
OK, and just on that, I mean, is there a sensitivity about how much is being spent on that, given all our problems here at home and the cost of living crisis and so on?
Well, there is to some extent, but I think the really important thing here is to look at it in context. £3.3 billion has had a transformative effect for the Ukraine war effort, but also, I mean, you look at the, for example, wage demands of various groups in the United Kingdom. It doesn't touch the sides. It doesn't come close to the tens of billions of pounds that are being asked for by the nurses or the multiple billions of pounds that are being asked for by those working on the railways, etc., etc., etc. It becomes the most remarkable difference. So a 1% nurse's pay rise costs £700 million. Now, asking for 19%, you can start to see the scale of this. You can start to see why the Chancellor's eyes have been sort of watering at these demands as well.
And telling Mr Barclay, keep your purse shut. We shall see what emerges, of course, on those pay talks. Tom, as ever, thank you for your assessment, and we'll hear from maybe the Prime Minister a little later on that visit to those Baltic states. Now, back to that High Court decision ruling that the government's planned policy of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda was lawful. Well, the skipper of that fishing boat, which helped to rescue dozens of migrants from the Channel last week, has actually hit out at UK immigration policy for making what he said a tragedy inevitable. In his first full interview since that tragedy, Raymond Strachan told GB News that British authorities have been acting as a migrant taxi service, encouraging ever-increasing numbers of people to make the perilous journey. Our Home and Security editor Mark White obtained more exclusive images of Wednesday's rescue operation and a warning that you may find parts of his report difficult.
Out in the pitch black of the English Channel, the sound of panicked cries for help. The six-man crew of the scallop boat Arcturus rush to help as they come alongside the stricken migrant boat. These images are deeply disturbing, but they highlight the very real dangers for these flimsy vessels and the quick thinking and bravery of local fishermen turned rescuers.
If we wasn't there, probably 45 people dead without any trace. Nobody was knowing they was there. I looked over the side, there was about 5 or 6 migrants hanging off the side of the boat.
For Raymond's crew, it was their training and instinct to help that kicked in.
It's not an easy task to try to pull a panicking person out of the water when they're fully clothed. soaking wet. When the other migrants in the dinghy seen they was getting rescued, they started swimming towards the boat.
There was, Raymond says, huge relief when the lifeboats and Coast Guard helicopters reached the scene.
It doesn't matter your political views in the migrant crisis. When you see people in the water screaming, shouting, begging for their life, if you've any compassion at all, the human nature thing to do is to rescue people. And that's what we did.
On board the Arcturus, although these survivors were rescued, they were clearly hypothermic. The Scallop boat's crew got them out of their wet clothes and into warm showers before giving them their dry clothes and some hot food. Outside, the fast rescue boat from the Royal Navy's offshore patrol vessel HMS Severn joined in the search for other survivors. As on board the fishing boat, medics checked over those rescued. Raymond Strachan said the events of Wednesday morning were inevitable. Like all local fishing crews, they regularly see migrant boats and often have to help. Like here in January, when the Arcturus had to stand by alongside two inflatables near Dungeness while they waited for UK authorities to arrive on scene. And that same month, this astonishing sight of 5 young men crammed in a tiny inflatable rowing across the channel without an onboard motor and not a single life jacket among them.
I've seen 5 successful crossings last Sunday. Then you get the UK government saying they're getting patrol boats out to stop the crossings. Well, I see the patrol boats there, but I just see them like a taxi service. That's what it is.
Although Wednesday saw tragedy in the Channel, Raymond says it won't act as a deterrent to these crossings. He and his crew expect to see many more migrant boats out here in the months ahead. Mark White, GB News.
Mark White's exclusive report there. Well, coming up, more reaction as the World Cup finishes with more than a flourish. We'll hear from fans of both sides in Qatar, celebrations and commiserations. First, though, an update on the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says she's committed to making the plan to send migrants to Rwanda work after High Court judges ruled the government's policy is legal. The Royal Courts of Justice ruled the policy, sending asylum seekers who came to the UK illegally to claim asylum in Rwanda, is consistent with the International Refugee Convention. The government has faced legal challenges which have so far prevented any flights from taking off. Charities have vowed to appeal today's decision, claiming the East African nation lacks a fair and efficient asylum system. The Nurses' Union says the Health Secretary will have to carry the can if patients suffer as a result of NHS strikes. The Royal College of Nursing has threatened further industrial action in the new year if ministers don't respond to their demands within 48 hours of tomorrow's walkout. Steve Barclay says he's open to talks with Unite ahead of strike action this week, but suggested the government will not budge on pay. He's put the onus on unions to ensure they supply sufficient emergency cover so patients get the care they need. More than 130 bus companies will cap single fares to help passengers amid the cost of living. National Express and Stagecoach are among companies which will introduce the £2 upper limit for fares in England outside of London from next year. It's to help people who are travelling for work, education and medical appointments. The scheme's being backed with £60 million worth of government funding. Now, Elon Musk could step down as the chief executive of Twitter. In a poll, he asked the public whether they thought he should stand down. 57% of more than 17 million voters said yes. Musk said he'd honour the result. He's faced significant criticism since taking over the platform, including his decisions around content moderation. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're up to date on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. That's bringing you the latest snapshot of the economy as you head towards Christmas, with Britain's leading business group, the CBI, revealing that manufacturers have reported their sharpest drop in output in more than 2 years. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, here with us to bring the doom and gloom once more. It's a continuing story, isn't it?
I'd love to bring you some Christmas cheer, Mark. But retail sales aren't doing badly. There's been a breakthrough in nuclear fusion, which is a kind of new form of energy.
Eventually.
Eventually, but the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, it does its industrial trends survey. It's been going for years and years and years.
And it's a biggie.
It's a very authoritative survey, and I can just bring you the headlines here. This shows that between October and December, Mark, you had output down in 11 of 17 UK manufacturing sectors, and this is a survey of 220 manufacturing firms. So this isn't just a sort of snapshot. I mean,
all sorts of sizes.
Absolutely. And one of the CBI economists, Anna Leach, this is what she said. We can just put it up as a graphic. The corrosive effect of higher inflation on demand is increasingly clear as manufacturing output contracted at the fastest pace in 2 years over the last quarter. A quarter is 3 months, of course. While some global price pressures have eased in recent months, cost and price inflation will likely remain very high in the near term, with rising energy bills a key concern for manufacturers. Now, I can give you just a little bit of colour, Mark, on that last point, rising energy bills, because you may remember the mini-budget back in September with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng as Prime Minister and Chancellor. It seems so long ago. And I said at the time, what really spooked financial markets wasn't that they wanted to cut the top rate of tax, which cost pennies relative to the all public spending.
45% rate, yeah.
Yeah. What really spooked the markets is that Truss and Kwarteng had implemented an energy support package, not just for households, but also for firms and businesses that lasted 2 whole years. And that really freaked out financial markets because it meant the British government...
Open-ended, effectively.
Open-ended borrowing commitment. So then Jeremy Hunt, when he came in to calm things down, he cut that energy support package for households and for businesses until it ended in April, right? Now, guess what? The Treasury is currently working on a new energy support package for businesses that goes all the way to April 2024.
Another year.
So it's not a million miles away from what Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss originally argued for, and it will really it will be much less generous than the Kwarteng Truss thing, but it will particularly help vulnerable sectors like steelmakers, also hospitality. Now, that's unofficial, what I've just said, but that's what I'm hearing from the Treasury.
Right, and we've got the steelmakers looking as if they might be on strike as well and asking for government help and so on. The snapshot that KPMG, which is a small group of economists, but, you know, they are at the sharp end, recession to last until the end of next year, shallow but protracted, which is what we've heard elsewhere. What does that mean for these manufacturing firms? That they've still got to basically hold on for another year if they can?
Just to rewind slightly, if I may, the steelmakers aren't saying they'll strike, not as far as I know. They're saying that the energy is so high that they can't make any money.
Right.
This is what Gavin Stace, who's a friend of GB News, the Steelmakers Federation spokesperson, he said this to myself and Nigel Farage last week, that steelmakers in Britain, steelmaking still employs 32,000 people in this country, right? We're not a backwater. But because the energy costs are so high, they just can't make any money. So they've just got to stop manufacturing because otherwise the company...
Right, so it's not a strike, they just can't afford to carry on.
That's right. They're warning that energy is so expensive that they simply can't function. And KPMG, they're one of the big 4 accounting firms, very authoritative. What they're doing is they're saying pretty much the same as the Bank of England. They reckon the recession is going to be long, so the economic contraction will last for a long time, but it will be relatively shallow compared to, say, what happened during COVID, when GDP fell by 10%, or what happened in the global financial crisis of 2008-9 when GDP fell by about 6%. So you've now got all the big institutions lining up saying what the Bank of England said wasn't a complete outlier. They do think there's going to be a prolonged recession. I would just add my 2 pence, though. I think they're being a little bit too pessimistic. I do think now inflation will fall relatively quickly in the new year. I'm not nearly as gloomy as these guys. A lot of these guys... They didn't predict inflation coming in the first place, and some of us did.
And what's interesting is that there are still lots of job vacancies out there.
Still lots of jobs.
Which is not what we've seen in previous recessions when unemployment really starts to
Exactly right. Now, they have to have a caveat there, right? A lot of GB News viewers and listeners will know that the jobs aren't always in the places where people want to work.
Or 0-hour contracts and so on.
The conditions might not be great. And also, many of our unemployed, though it's quite a small number, won't have the skills to fulfil those jobs. That's what we call geographic and occupational mismatch. But the vacancies are out there. They're coming down, but there's still more than 1 million vacancies, which suggests that not all business leaders are as gloomy as those who are surveyed by the CBI.
Including you. Excellent. A little bit of Christmas cheer in this week as we head towards... Anyway, let's get back to the doom and gloom with former Top Gear presenter Jeremy Clarkson being widely criticised after saying that he, yes, this is correct, dreams of the day that the Duchess of Sussex is paraded through the streets naked and has excrement thrown at her. Well, he made those comments in his Sun newspaper column, expressing what he said was the hatred for the Duchess. Well, even Clarkson's own daughter has joined the backlash against him. Emily Clarkson posting on social media that she stands against everything her father said. Well, joining us now is Bushra Sheikh, who's a former BBC Apprentice candidate and anti-racism campaigner. Thank you very much for joining us, Bushra. What do you make of this? Maybe a schoolboy approach of writing a naughty word on the blackboard and then running away?
Wow, no. This is absolutely disgusting. We cannot tolerate hate speech like this, regardless of what you think about the person and their behaviour. We are trying to kind of advocate violence against women not to happen in this country. And somebody like Clarkson, like Jeremy, who has a powerful platform, how dare he use this in this way? Honestly, I have no words. I am infuriated at his actions and his behaviour, and he knew exactly what was going to happen when he did his column and he printed this.
Yeah, and it is widely read as well. And, of course, the issue being this is exactly the sort of thing that both Harry and Meghan outlined in their docu-series as being deeply personal and hurtful.
Absolutely. The very thing that they were complaining about in regards to the British PR and the media is the very thing that Jeremy Clarkson has done. If we were going to tackle the Meghan and Harry issue and really figure out what was going on there, words and hate speech and misogyny and this barbaric old school mentality definitely feeds right into what they were talking about. It's beyond helpful. It's something that this country and on a global scale we cannot accept, honestly, because we have young children that are growing up in a climate that we have to protect. And this is just fueling the fire that hate speech against somebody is okay. And it's not. We need to keep a balanced approach in this country, especially when mental health is on the rise.
Yeah, and obviously one of the issues that we saw in the documentary was that she did actually suffer with some very serious mental health issues that her mother addressed with suicidal thoughts. Is the fact that his own daughter has gone public on social media to make a stand against him, I mean, is that perhaps the best judgment that can be made?
I think it's one of the best judgments. And honestly, I would not want to be in his position. As a parent myself, Jeremy Clarkson has a responsibility to his own children and his daughter to do the very thing that would protect her. How would he feel if someone did that about her? And regardless of what we think of Meghan, I am not the biggest fan of Meghan. I would never, ever, ever do that on a public platform in this way. And you know what? I am absolutely supportive, and it's her bravery to stand up against her father. And you know, I mean, come on, he's a father. He should be so embarrassed.
I will give you the opportunity before you leave us to ask you what would you like to do to Jeremy Clarkson?
Oh, you know what? I definitely think that right now he deserves to have everything. Pull the plug on him right now. He does not deserve to have a voice in this country at this moment until he understands what he has done wrong. And when you have behaviour like that, there are actions that you have to accept that follow that. And I'm sorry, he just needs to be made voiceless right now.
Or maybe just make him road test a larder for the next year, who knows. Bushra, thank you very much indeed for your time joining us here on GB News, and we'll see what the further reaction is, of course. Thank you. Now, if you were on the telly, watching the telly yesterday, you may have noticed Argentina became world champions, winning their first World Cup since 1986, and in what a way. Ending that fairy tale for footballing legend Lionel Messi. A final to be remembered, finishing 3-3 after extra time and then 4-2 on penalties. Our reporter Paul Hawkins in Qatar throughout the tournament savoured the scenes afterwards.
Unsurprisingly, there's some half-price World Cup merchandise going, and there's still some England and France shirts over there. So you'll probably get some good deals on that now. But what a final it was, and really the Hollywood ending that everyone, certainly the neutrals and Argentinian fans, were hoping for, with Lionel Messi winning the World Cup, and possibly in one of the greatest World Cup matches ever, possibly the greatest World Cup match ever, let alone World Cup final. Question is, how are Argentina fans feeling the morning after? We can speak to some of them now. What's your name?
Oh, my name is Sonia Ole, and this is my son.
Calvin. Calvin, yes. Hi, Sonia and Calvin. How are you feeling this morning?
Well, I have to say I'm from Argentina, okay? Porque me ven hablando español. My son is from United States. How do I feel? We cry. We cry, we scream. That's why I lost my voice. The whole world, we felt that energy, especially when Messi left that cup. It was just like, I look around, I was not the only one crying. So that's when you realize that the world was with us and it was supporting. I'm going to miss hearing all the time, Messi, Messi, Maradona, Argentina, all the time. I'm going back home today and I'm like sad, really, but excited, super happy, super happy.
Calvin, do you really, how old are you?
14.
You're 14 years old, and you realise you've been at possibly the greatest World Cup match, the greatest World Cup final ever. What was it like during the game? What your emotions?
let's see, I had a mix of different emotions. I was angry, happy, and extremely scared because when France made those 2 goals in the first 10 minutes, it scared me.
Yeah. Right at the end. I mean, you must have.
Yeah.
Did you always think you were going to do it, or were you like,
Oh, no.
I thought it was going to be 2-0, to be honest.
No, I knew it from the beginning. Actually, I got a lot of Argentines upset because I told them, guys, we're gonna win. We're gonna win this. I was like, Sonia, don't tell us that. Don't. What's it called? She go. What's it called? Don't. Okay.
Don't jinx us.
Don't jinx us. I'm like, but dude, I'm telling you, we're gonna win. I'm like, oh please. And I want to raise the cup. I bought the cup, and I'm like raising it. I'm like, don't do that. So I knew 100%. I knew it would be hard. It was a harder game, but yeah, our team was. We got so much. The whole crowd, the fans, the people. That's what I think at the end gave us that extra oomph, right? The French didn't have.
And what about the keeper, Martinez? Everyone talks about Messi, but what about Martinez?
Oh my gosh, Martinez! Wow, and the goalkeeper was amazing, and I'm like just like. Each of them getting those, goals, catching those goals. I was just like, and each of them playing. It was just all of them. I think or defense, they're like huge and they're fast. Like, yeah, definitely.
Intimidating.
Wait. But did you see how well they play? I was just
they did play really well. I think they wanted it more.
Yeah.
They wanted it more. Mbappe aside, France were pretty average.
Yes. It was very average. We did see it. After the Licel on the bus. And if you watch the Obelisco in Argentina, but if you watch around the world, people were cheering up for Argentina. Yeah. And we saw them on the bus last night and waving and celebrating. It was,
And what time did you go to bed?
Always like 5 in the morning.
I went to bed at 5. She went to bed at 5:30.
Wow. Okay.
Almost every day.
Yeah. And you're flying back today?
Today, like 3:30. We're going back to actually the next World Cup. Because we're going to host you. We want to say thank you to the Qatari people. Yeah. And we invited you.
You've got the next World Cup here,
yes.
haven't you? All lined up, America, Mexico, and
Canada.
Yeah.
We're lined up. We're ready. Sonia, #SoniaOle26. And come and find us. We'll sell you the tickets to accommodations.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, deal. Okay.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. No wonder those guys are so excited. But that gives you a flavour of the kind of atmosphere that was at the game last night. And really, that's the kind of atmosphere that there has been throughout this World Cup. Yes, it's highlighted migrant workers' rights, LGBTQ issues, but it has been a World Cup for the fans. It will be a World Cup like no other, given the size of the country and how many matches a lot of fans have been able to see in such a short space of time.
Paul Hawkins updating us. With strangely no French shirts for sale there, it seems. Joining us now in the studio, sports broadcaster, journalist Aidan McGee. What a final.
Incredible. I mean, I'm struggling. I've watched every one since '86, and the '86 one, which was the last one, Argentina won, of course, against West Germany. They were 2-0 up quite early. They surrendered that lead in the last 10 minutes of the game when West Germany fought back as they were then, and then it just right at the end, I think it was Burchagi went through with a Maradona through ball. Maradona had been suffocated almost throughout the game, and he just produced that bit of magic. And it was a similar story last night, really. Argentina looked imperious for the first half, and even going into the second, it wasn't until late.
Well, I think a lot of people were sort of tweeting, oh, this is really boring, and I'm not watching this anymore. They were 2-0 up, and then bang, suddenly
anyone old enough to remember the 1979 FA Cup final, it was known as the 5-minute cup final because everything happened in the last few minutes. Now, that wasn't exactly the same last night, but we certainly got a fight back from France. They found their range, and of course, their world-class players came to the fore.
Exactly. I mean, that was the extraordinary thing. That first half, Mbappe seemed to have disappeared. I don't know whether he wasn't up to it because of this virus they had.
Well, there was talk of the virus. There was talk of the virus, but they played it down so much in the days leading up to it. In fact, all the players had been out on display training, and the cameras had been allowed to film 5 minutes of training. And you wonder how genuine that was, because they looked to be laid low by it in the first half.
Yeah, and this was the fascination, the battle between Mbappe and Messi about the generational gap. Who's going to come out on top. And I have to say, it was just delightful to see them both in action, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was absolutely outstanding.
The beautiful game was on show.
And then also, so often we've seen, even in this tournament, which has produced a really high level of performance, when you go into extra time, they normally clam up. They didn't. They kept going at each other. And it looked like they were determined to win it in extra time. Maybe neither of them fancied penalties particularly, but
that's what happened afterwards.
I know. You had to feel sorry for him in some ways because he's performed well all tournament. But listen, he's got a World Cup winners' medal already. He's 23. Yeah. He's probably got at least two more World Cups. Yeah, two more at least. I mean, who knows? With the advent of sports science in the next few years,
we don't think we'll see him again at a World Cup.
I don't think. No, I don't see why he'd have the hunger to do it. I mean, he's won 11 league titles, domestic titles. He's won 7 Ballon d'Ors, Copa America, 4 Champions Leagues. There's not much left to do.
Aidan, thank you for now, but you're back with a certain Chris Scudder a little later. So
sounds good.
Yeah, replaying all the action then. Stay with us. We'll be back after the hour.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
It's just gone 1 o'clock. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up this hour, it's just sick. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, challenged over the state of the NHS by the mother of an ill child in hospital as nurses and ambulance workers prepare for further strikes. Rishi Sunak in the Baltic region to urge fellow leaders to stand firm in their support for Ukraine as he pledges new aid to guard against Russian aggression. We'll be discussing the importance of that visit. The government's planned policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda ruled legal at the High Court. Could the deportations actually start going ahead? With no one yet flown out. We'll get reaction as the Home Secretary is due to speak. And that incredible World Cup final after Argentina triumph over France. A fairy tale ending for the all-time great Lionel Messi. We'll be getting reaction with sports broadcaster Chris Scudder, a veteran of 8 World Cups. And as ever, let us know what you think of the big news and events. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before that, latest news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 1. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says she's committed to making the Rwanda migrant plan work after the High Court ruled the government's policy is legal. The Royal Courts of Justice has ruled the policy, sending asylum seekers who came to the UK illegally to claim asylum in Rwanda, is consistent with the International Refugee Convention. The government's faced numerous legal challenges which so far had prevented any flights from taking off. Charities have vowed to appeal today's decision, claiming the East African nation lacks a fair and efficient asylum system. Steve Valdez-Simmons, Director Amnesty International UK, told GB News he thinks it's a disappointing decision.
More that is put into simply stopping people making journeys, rather than providing them the means to not need to make the journey, either finding safety in France or finding a safe way of getting to the UK. The more we just go down the way we're going at the moment, the more dangerous the journeys are going to get, the more out of sight they are going to be attempted, and the more lives that will be put at risk.
The skipper of the fishing boat which helped rescue dozens of migrants from the Channel last week has criticised UK immigration policy for making the tragedy, he says, inevitable. The government says it has a legal duty to pick up anyone in distress in the Channel. Skipper Raymond Strachan told GB News British authorities have been acting as a migrant taxi service, encouraging ever-increasing numbers of people to make the journey.
When you get the UK government saying they're sending patrol boats out to stop the crossings, well, I see the patrol boats there, but I just see them like a taxi service. That's what it is.
The mother of a 3-year-old girl has criticised the Health Secretary on the eve of another nationwide nurses' strike. The Nurses' Union has threatened further industrial action in the new year if ministers don't respond to their demands within 48 hours of tomorrow's walkout. The Health Secretary says he's open to talks, but suggested the government will not budge on pay. The mother told Mr Barclay at a hospital in South London it's unfair to blame the current resourcing issues on the pandemic.
We had problems in the NHS before we went into the pandemic. We were short of doctors, we were short of beds going into the pandemic. So I think it's really wrong to blame it on the pandemic. And actually, the damage that you're doing to families like myself is terrible.
The Health Secretary says he's keen to work with the unions to address the range of concerns that matter to staff, but says they must provide sufficient emergency cover to protect patients.
We need to focus on patients and addressing the backlogs that we have, particularly the waiting list for operations as a result of the pandemic. And that's why it's important that we work together, and I'm very keen to continue those talks with the RCN and other trade unions so we can mitigate any impact on patient safety.
The Prime Minister has called on Northern European allies to stand firm in their support of Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has told fellow leaders in Latvia it's an incredibly important time for the Defence Alliance to come together. He also stressed the importance of maintaining severe economic consequences on Russia.
We must continue to focus on degrading Russia's capability to regroup and to resupply. And that means going after its supply chains and removing the international support. Particularly, I'm thinking of Iran and the weapons that it's currently providing to Russia, which we should be very strong about calling out, as we have done in the United Nations.
More than 130 bus companies will cap single fares to help passengers amid the cost of living crisis. National Express and Stagecoach are among companies which will introduce the £2 upper limit for fares in England outside of London from next year. It's to help people who are travelling for work, education and medical appointments. The scheme is being backed with £60 million worth of government funding. Network Rail is warning strikes by railway workers will cause needless misery by severely disrupting services over the festive period. Thousands of RMT work members are going to walk out from 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve until the 27th of December. The RAC said traffic will be especially bad this Friday and Saturday in light of the strikes, with 20 million cars estimated to hit the motorways this week. They predict almost 8 million journeys will be made over the 2 days before Christmas Day. Elon Musk could step down as the chief executive of Twitter. In a poll, he asked the public whether he thought he should stand down. 57% of more than 17 million voters said yes. Musk said he'd honour the results. He's faced significant criticism since taking over the platform, including around his decisions over content moderation. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens.
So, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, confronted by the mother of a sick child on his visit to a hospital just a day before another nurses' strike is due to get underway, and further walkouts by ambulance workers due later this week. Well, he was visiting King's College University Hospital in London when he met the mother of a 3-year-old girl with cystic fibrosis. This is what Sarah Pennington-Old said about the care of her daughter Lucy.
We have some brilliant experts, and they're being worked to the bone, you know, and actually the level of care they provide is amazing, but they're not being able to provide it in the way they want to provide it because the resourcing is not there, you know. Like I said, on Monday we were due to be in, and the number of people coming through the door is too many, and it's not fair to blame it on the pandemic anymore, is it? Because actually we had problems in the NHS before we went into the pandemic. We were short of doctors, we were short of beds going into the pandemic, so I think it's really wrong to blame it on the pandemic, and actually the damage that you're doing to families like myself is terrible.
Well, no reaction there by Mr Barclay to what was being said, but he spoke to journalists after the visit, encouraging the unions to get back to talks in the interests of patients, but stating once again that a 19% pay rise was unreasonable.
Well, I deeply regret the disruption to patients. We've accepted in full the independent pay review body recommendations, and I think it's important now that the trade unions do likewise. Well, I don't think a 19% pay rise at a time when many of your viewers are already facing cost of living pressures is reasonable. We have an independent process that looks at the challenges on pay and what is affordable and what is right for the NHS, and that independent process has made recommendations, and we've accepted those recommendations in full. And of course that comes on top of prioritising the NHS last year at a time when other public sector workers had a pay freeze, and we prioritised the NHS with a 3% pay rise.
So the Secretary of State reiterating the government's position. Meanwhile, the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Jonathan Ashworth, spoke to GB News about Labour's policy on the issue.
Negotiate on pay, that's the first thing. We would recruit more doctors and nurses, because this isn't just about pay, it's about the pressures they are under because they're so short of staff across the whole of the health service. So we would get rid of the non-dom tax rate, and we would use the money from that non-dom tax change to recruit more doctors, more nurses, more paramedics in our NHS. So that would relieve pressures on the front line, and it would actually help us treat patients more quickly, because you know there's a massive waiting list. 400,000 people are waiting over a year for treatment, many of them waiting in actual pain and distress for that treatment. So we'd recruit more doctors and nurses, and we would sit down and negotiate about the terms and the conditions under which they work, about the way in which the independent pay process works. So we would actually have a serious conversation with our NHS staff. We've not got that at the moment.
Let's get more with our political reporter Olivia Utley joining us in the studio. Olivia, the sort of political ping-pong continues, but we heard then with that mum, Sarah Pennington-Old, about the real human damage. The damage you're doing to families is terrible, she said. And no response that we are aware of in the hospital there from the Health Secretary. It indicates, though, that it's not just about figures of 19% and so on.
Absolutely, and we know we keep hearing these very personal stories of people who are going to be horribly affected by not just the nurses' strikes, but the ambulance strikes and the run up to Christmas as well. The story on the front page of the Telegraph this morning is about elderly, healthy people who will have to spend Christmas away from their families because without enough nurses around, it'll be impossible to actually just discharge them. The admin of discharging them won't be possible. So that means there'll be up to, the Telegraph estimates, over 13,000 healthy people in beds over Christmas.
Which means the ambulances can't then unload...
The ambulance can't unload the patients who desperately need to be there. So it's a really desperate situation, but it's very difficult to see a way through. I think Steve Barclay is now beginning to feel the pressure himself and is saying that he would like to reopen talks with Pat Cullen, which is a bit of progress.
Yeah.
But Number 10 has given him very little wiggle room. It's very hard to see what negotiation leverage he has.
This is interesting because we're getting these indications that one of the things being discussed is maybe a one-off pay deal for the nurses to get them through this year. But even that maybe is being blocked by the Treasury or by Number 10 and the Treasury.
Yeah, so what happened in Scotland was nurses were asking for a pay rise. Instead, they were given a one-off payment, a flat fee for everyone, which for those at the lower end of the pay scale did work out.
It was pretty generous in percentage terms.
It was actually very generous in percentage terms. But it's much easier to do in Scotland, of course, because quite simply there are far fewer nurses in Scotland. Right. It would be far more expensive to do in England. And at the moment, Rishi Sunak is pushing a block on it. But it is now looking more and more like there could be a fresh wave of strikes in January. And the sort of political calculation that the government seems to have made is that, as with the rail strikes, the hope is that public support for the nurses' strikes would sort of begin to ebb away. And if they keep repeating this sort of 19% figure, the public will start to think, well, that's unreasonable. I'm sick of my family having to go through all this, and it's the fault of the nurses. As yet, we haven't yet seen that shift in public opinion.
No.
And that's really piling the pressure on.
But what we have seen is attitudes seemingly to harden. The RCN reminding people that it's got a remit for action for 6 months, or the mandate is for 6 months, that they are digging in on this.
They are digging in on this, and it's worth mentioning that the relationship between Pat Cullen, the chief of the Royal College of Nursing, and Steve Barclay, the health secretary, has pretty much sort of broken down. Steve Barclay is saying that he'd like to reopen talks again, but relations are just so bad between them. There was a press conference last week where she could literally barely contain her anger. So Steve Barclay sort of put in the job as this big political beast who's willing to make tough decisions, which of course is useful, but at this stage you need a sort of conciliatory personality, and we don't really have that. So finding that route through is looking harder
and very quickly on that, still no indication of anything with Unite, Unison and GMB, all involved, of course, with the ambulance workers and other ancillary staff.
Yeah, no progress being made at all, and that's actually the really pressing problem for Steve Barclay and Rishi Sunak, because there is no minimum level of service guaranteed with the ambulance strikers. They're still working out what will happen to life-preserving care in the next few days.
Or urgent care and what that actually means.
Exactly.
Not a happy picture. Olivia, for the moment, thank you. More, of course, as we get it from either Number 10 or Number 11, or indeed from the Health Secretary. But let's now move on to what the Prime Minister has been up to. He's been using a trip to the Baltic region to urge fellow leaders to stand firm in their support for Ukraine, pledging a new stream of defence aid to guard against Russian aggression. Well, first, he went to meet Northern European allies in Latvia. Rishi Sunak calling on counterparts to sustain or boost their current offers of aid. He's travelling then to Estonia, meeting British troops to sign a new technology digital partnership. Ukrainian President Zelensky expected to address that summit. Well, let's get more with former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We understand that part of the deal is artillery. They've got to tread carefully here, haven't they? Because obviously if the Russians believe that this is offensive in any way rather than defensive capability, it could change their attitude.
I don't think the artillery does that. We've been providing anti-tank weapon, artillery weapons and ammunition since the invasion began. So it's not that, it's extending different weapons if you believe in the sort of escalation model. So I think it's appropriate at the moment to do that because most of the artillery is being used to take out the Russians in Ukrainian territory. It is not being used for offensive operations in Russian territory, the deep battle which Ukraine has begun to fight.
And maybe much of a psychological message as well to all these Baltic nations with this joint expeditionary force that clearly there's a reconsideration by both Finland and Sweden in terms of their position with NATO. This is to bolster things maybe with some hardware as well.
Yeah, I think the message is actually wider. You don't have to tell the Baltic countries that you need to support Ukraine. And if you look at the percentages of their defence budgets that they've given to Ukraine, they're absolutely phenomenal and beyond anyone else in NATO. For example, Lithuania has provided 16.7% of its defence budget, Latvia 41%, Estonia 37%. The reason that they do that is because they know what it's like to live under Russian oppression, and the reason that they joined NATO, because it is that collective commitment to the defence. And that is why that they will support Ukraine till the nth degree. So the message is wider to those who might waver elsewhere, and we might sort of say those who are in Western Europe rather than the ones who are on the fringes and border Russia, which is always the problem, because if Russia is deemed to be successful and victorious in Ukraine, the notion is that they won't stop, and the next ones to be picked off will be the Baltic states of Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia.
Yeah, so self-preservation as much as anything else. But in terms of neighbouring states as well, obviously we're looking at the situation with Belarus and questions being asked as to whether there'll be a second Russian incursion from the north using Belarus as a cover. I mean, what's your assessment of that?
Well, you've already got Ukrainian forces who are fixed there, that is, opposing that Belarusian border because of the fact that there has always been the potential for that. And if you're a Ukrainian general, you should always take the worst case that combat power could still come from that flank towards. Of course, a lot of this is also informational messaging feeding back to both Europe and the US that you must continue to support us, because if we run out of the means, then there is a chance that we might get overrun, because at the end of the day, your total means and your strength of will gives you the power of resistance. So as long as they are supported, the Ukrainians, they have a good to middling chance of being successful.
Right, but we were getting the indication that much Russian mobile armour and tanks and so on had been destroyed in the initial incursions.
That's right, but if you look at the reserves of Russia, there are probably something like 9,000 armoured vehicles still in stores. Now, a lot of them are probably in really bad order, and they might be able to cannibalise those to produce maybe a third of that force. And a lot of people will say, well, a lot of those tanks are T-64, i.e. a tank which has been in service for over 50 years. But if you've got a tank with a large gun and armour, which has been in service for 50 years, and the other side does not, and doesn't have the means to take it out, a 50-year-old tank is still a successful mode of combined arms warfare.
Yeah, difficult to argue with. Well, that's the military situation. Thank you very much indeed for updating us on that. Let's get now some reaction with our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, on the political aspect with Rishi Sunak on the world stage, and in particular with an issue that Boris Johnson did so well on, of course, in terms of support for Ukraine.
Yes, it's interesting because Rishi Sunak has always been a very domestic policy-focused politician. All of his previous portfolios in government had been focused on the domestic economy. He, of course, was Chief Secretary to the Treasury and then Chancellor. He's someone who has lived abroad, who has an international outlook, but who hasn't really been tested in terms of foreign affairs. It was one of the sort of weaker points of his during the leadership election over the summer, where, of course, Liz Truss, then the serving Foreign Secretary, had a big play on China and on Ukraine, on Russia, on all of these points. Rishi Sunak tried to sort of develop a bit of foreign policy over that campaign, but it never really stuck. And so he has now been on a couple of foreign trips. Of course, he's visited Kiev. He's met President Zelensky in Ukraine. He's been, of course, to Bali for the G20. And now he's in Estonia and Latvia for this joint expeditionary force meeting. And, of course, the United Kingdom leads the joint expeditionary force. This is something that has been in place since 2014. It's something that the United Kingdom really does take a lead on. It's one of these organisations, I suppose, that is so involved in the security of Europe, but separate to the European Union. One of these things that the United Kingdom can take a lead in different ways, in cooperative structures. And really, Rishi Sunak there, standing at the front of that meeting, leading the meeting. Of course, President Zelensky spoke at it earlier as well, and standing at the front for a group picture, as they do in all of these various summits, appearing at the front and centre of things. It'll be interesting to see how he's received by these other countries as well.
We're more used to seeing Boris Johnson with President Zelensky, of course, in various walkabouts. But the other aspect was that when Boris Johnson was visiting Kyiv, it was a pretty open-ended check, I think some might have said. And that wasn't easy for Rishi Sunak, trying to hold on to the purse strings. Will he have to reassess that now? I think 250 million is the figure being used at the moment for artillery supplies and so on, which is not that huge amount when you're talking about these sorts of things. But will he perhaps realise that there's got to be a deeper and more open-ended commitment now?
Well, it's interesting, of course, over the weekend we saw some reports that have been pretty heavily denied by Number 10, but it does seem like there is a bit of an inkling of truth in them, that Rishi Sunak has asked for some sort of audit of aid being sent to Ukraine. There's been suggestions that he wants a dashboard drawn up. Now, the Prime Minister's spokesman earlier today denied any sort of semblance of dashboards being created within Number 10, but didn't seem to address in the specifics whether or not this audit has been asked for. Ultimately, £2.3 billion of taxpayers' money has been spent on aiding Ukraine in the round over the last 6 months. Might sound like a lot. It certainly has helped Ukraine a lot. And the argument of the government, of course, is that it's actually a very good investment in terms of stopping future aggression. It might save money in the long run. But when you compare it to, for example, pay demands of the unions, it's
and the
nowhere
sensitivities.
close.
It's difficult, isn't it? Tom, for the moment, thank you, and we'll see what emerges, of course, from this trip to those Baltic states. Also coming up, in terms of government policy, the latest reaction to the High Court ruling that the government's plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda is legal. Well, let's take a look at that all-important weather now.
Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met's office. A mild Monday out there, quite blustery, gusty winds. And most of us will see a little bit more rain as well. This area of low pressure is responsible. Weather fronts spiralling around it, and the winds coming up from the south or the southwest. This time last week it was northerly winds. That's why we've got a complete switch around. Much milder air, but also wetter air. So it's a grey day for most. Not too much rain across eastern England until later through the afternoon. And Northern Ireland turning a bit brighter through the afternoon too. But the rain heavy and persistent for parts of Scotland, South Wales and South West England. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place here. But everywhere it's mild. Temperatures getting into the teens, perhaps even as high as 15 Celsius in one or two places. Last week we were struggling to get much above freezing. Stays mild and fairly soggy across much of England and Wales overnight. Further outbreaks of rain coming in here, but largely dry for Northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Just a few showers for Northern Ireland and the far northwest of Scotland. It will stay fairly breezy and it will be a mild night, very mild across the south. Temperatures further north dipping to single figures. But clear skies means for many it's a bright day on Tuesday. We'll start with cloud and rain across East Anglia and the southeast, but that should scoot away. There will be some showers for North Wales, northwest England, northwest Scotland, the odd one zipping through across Northern Ireland. Still quite breezy, but perhaps not as windy as today. And still quite mild, but not as mild as today. Temperatures generally a touch above average, 9 to maybe 11 Celsius. So some fine weather to come on Tuesday, but the rest of the week remaining fairly mixed. Still plenty of showers coming in through Tuesday evening across the west, and we could see some more rain then coming in overnight Tuesday night, which could take a time to clear away from eastern areas on Wednesday. As I said, chopping and changing throughout this week, staying quite mild in the south, but it will turn a bit colder further north. Bye for now.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's bring you the latest on Jeremy Clarkson's assessment of Meghan Markle with a piece that he published in The Sun over the weekend, saying he despised Meghan Markle on a cellular level, with a different type of hate he felt for First Minister of Scotland Nicola Sturgeon and serial killer Rose West. He went on to say that he dreamt of seeing people throwing lumps of excrement at her. I'm unable to sleep as I lie there at night, grinding my teeth, dreaming of the day when she's made to parade naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her. Well, he's now issued an apology on Twitter after some 6,000 complaints. This is what he said. "Oh dear, I've rather put my foot in it. In a column I wrote about Meghan, I made a clumsy reference to a scene in Game of Thrones, and this has gone down badly with a great many people. I'm horrified to have caused so much hurt, and I shall be more careful in future." However, Ipso, the independent press standards organisation, says it's confirmed thousands of people have complained, and BBC telling that the complaints are being assessed in line with its standard procedure. We shall bring you more reaction on that as we get it. Of course, Clarkson's daughter, Emily, among the first to publicly condemn his comments. Right, let's get back to what the Home Secretary is saying about this Rwanda situation, saying she's committed to making the migrant deal work after the High Court ruled that the government's policy to send illegal immigrants there is lawful. Suella Braverman said her focus remained on moving ahead with the policy as soon as possible. Now, since the plan was originally announced in April, there have been legal challenges by charities and campaign groups arguing the East African nation was not safe for asylum seekers. But the High Court judge's ruling the policy is consistent with International Refugee Convention. It also comes as the government's criticised for failing to consider the worsening crisis in Rwanda itself, seeking to deport asylum seekers there. So, what does this actually mean? Let's get more with our security editor, Mark White, who's been looking at the High Court's decision. And it's sort of split in two ways, in that it's saying that 8 individuals, with regards to that original flight, that the government was wrong in their particular circumstances, but the overall policy is lawful.
There's no doubt that this is an important ruling for the government, because it does show that, yes, that fundamental policy of sending people to Rwanda for processing and to remain there, because it would be a one-way ticket, is lawful, is in line with the UN Refugee Convention. However, the way it was implemented in terms of sending these 8 individuals, because they were the part of the challenge of this judicial review, the ruling of which we got today, they had not been properly assessed in terms of whether they were fit and proper people to send, whether there was any extenuating circumstances which meant that they shouldn't be sent. Now, that's not to say that once that has been investigated, they wouldn't be sent.
but just that the process wasn't properly gone through and they weren't properly assessed as to see whether they were fit and proper to be sent.
Right, now we're getting a statement from Suella Braverman to the House of Commons at 3:30 where she may indicate the way forward. But clearly that part of the argument that the various agencies had in terms of these 8 individuals was that this was being rushed through and that their status, if you like, had not been assessed, which takes a lot of time. So it may not be that we'll see aircraft suddenly ready to fly off on the runways.
Yeah, but the thrust of the policy really was to assess their status and whether they were suitable to be given asylum in a
Rwanda
third
itself.
country.
Yeah.
And if they were granted asylum, they would be kept in that country. So it's really about whether there was any other circumstances that suggest that they have particular vulnerabilities that mean they can't go to Rwanda to have that process take place.
Labour's reaction to this is that the Rwandan government had already said it could only process 200 people a year, and therefore saying that's why it won't work, regardless of any court decision.
I think this was always meant to be a staged process. £120 million initially to a Rwandan government to make accommodation available for a few hundred people, to also put the processes in place there from a civil service point of view in Rwanda so that they could carry out the asylum assessments in that country. And then if they were accepted, the process of integrating them into civil society and giving them jobs and accommodation, etc. But the plan was always to then ramp up the number they would send to Rwanda, because the government knows when you've got 45,000 people coming here that sending 300 to Rwanda is no deterrent. If that's the odds, you're going to take those odds any day.
And that was still the main thrust of the policy, was to act as a deterrent, of course. However, what could happen now? We've got the Court of Appeal, we've got the Supreme Court, we've got several bodies involved who've been making these legal challenges. We assume this is not going to be the end of the process.
No, we're on the merry-go-round of the judicial process again. We were at this stage actually earlier in the year because it was initially challenged.
I'm just going to interrupt there, Mark, because we're just about to hear from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who is in the Baltic states, as we were saying, and he's been talking about support for those states with the Russian threat. This, I think, is just coming through. This is what he's had to say in the last few minutes.
I think, first of all, we're going to talk about why we're here. And clearly, Ukraine, we heard from President Zelensky, is dominating proceedings here. There's been lots of talk about Russia stepping up action in recent weeks, that there could be a new winter offensive. Do you have any knowledge of that? And how concerned are you about these recent attacks?
Well, that's why meeting here today with our Northern European partners and allies is so important. It was great to hear from President Zelensky about their needs, and the UK has played a leading role in providing Ukraine with the military support that they require to repel Russian aggression and indeed push back and regain the territory which is rightfully theirs. That was a topic of our conversations here today. I'm pleased to say that there's widespread support amongst our Northern European allies to continue supporting Ukraine. We stand united in that motivation. Our resolve is strong, and Zelensky and Ukraine will continue to get the support that they need. It's something that the United Kingdom and everyone in it should feel enormously proud of, the part that we've played.
Let's talk about domestic issues, strikes first of all. It is entirely possible this week, Prime Minister, that people might needlessly die because of this strike action. Many people saying, why will you not sit down with the unions and talk about pay and ensure that people get the healthcare they deserve ahead of Christmas?
Well, it's really important to me that the government is always acting reasonably and indeed fairly and making the right long-term decisions for the country. And that's been our approach throughout the pay-setting negotiations with the public sector. Now, our door is always open. The Health Secretary has been very clear with that. Of course, we're always happy to sit down and talk to people to try and work through difficult challenges like this. That's always been the case. Now, when it comes to pay, it's because these things are difficult that we have an independent process. We have an independent independent body that makes recommendations to the government about what reasonable and fair pay settlements are. Now, the government accepted those recommendations in full across the public sector, even though in many cases those recommendations were higher than what the government had originally suggested, and indeed higher than what many people in the private sector were receiving. But the government increased its offer so it could accept those independent recommendations in full. I thought that was the reasonable and the fair thing to do, because it's really important that we combat inflation. It's inflation which is making everybody in the UK's life difficult. I'm determined to grip inflation, to reduce it, and part of us doing that is having a responsible and fair approach to pay, and that's what we're doing.
Can you reassure or guarantee that people will not die this week because of these strikes? I mean, we are talking about paramedics walking out and nurses have been on strike.
Yeah, well, I'm really disappointed to see that the unions are calling these strikes, particularly at Christmas, particularly when it has such an impact on people's day-to-day lives with the disruption it causes and the impact on their health. And I'd urge them to keep considering whether these strikes are really necessary and do everything they can to alleviate the impact it's going to have on people. And of course, the government, for its part, is being responsible in putting in place contingency measures to make sure we're well prepared to handle the disruption that is coming.
Let's talk about Rwanda. You had a victory in the High Court today. Many people are asking now, when are the flights going to take off? I mean, they've been promised for months and months. Is it going to happen soon?
Well, I welcome the decision of the court today. We've always maintained that our Rwanda policy is lawful. I'm pleased that was confirmed today. And this is just one part of our plan to tackle illegal migration. Last week, I set out a very comprehensive approach to stopping the boats from coming to the UK. It's not going to be easy, and we're not going to be able to do it overnight, but I'm confident that with the steps I laid out last week, we really can get to grips with illegal migration, because I think what we all want to see and what I want to deliver is a system whereby if you come to the UK illegally, you will not have the right to stay, and we will be able to return you to your own country if it's safe, or a safe alternative like Rwanda. That's a common sense position, I think, of the vast majority of the British public. It's my position, and that's what I want to deliver as Prime Minister.
Jeremy Clarkson's been criticised in the last 24 hours or so. In fact, I think he's in many ways just apologising in the last couple of hours about comments he wrote in the Sunday Times yesterday regarding the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. Do you feel that actually for lots of commentators that kind of misogyny and racism to a degree is acceptable in some of our newspapers or among some of our well-known commentators?
I think for everyone in public life, language matters. You asked about racism. Now, I absolutely, I've seen some of the things that have been said. I absolutely don't believe that Britain is a racist country, and I'd hope that as our nation's first British Asian Prime Minister, when I say that, it carries some weight. I'm really proud of our country, its culture, its resilience, its beauty, and actually it's an enormous privilege to champion Britain and indeed its institutions like the monarchy when I'm out and about on the world stage as I am here today.
And just very finally, again, someone's been criticised. It is Gary Neville for comments he made equating Qatari migrant workers with the nurses that have gone on strike. What do you think of that comparison? Many feel that it's unfair. He's not rowing back, though. He says it's entirely justified.
No, I don't think that's right at all, in fact. And if you look at our track record and my track record, as Chancellor, I've always done everything I can to support our NHS and indeed the wonderful people who work in it. I grew up in an NHS family. I spent my life working in my mum's pharmacy when I was younger. And if you look at what we did during COVID, we provided enormous support to the front line at a time when it comes to pay, when everyone else in the public sector experienced a pay freeze. The one group that was singled out for special treatment were the NHS workers, rightly, who received that support. But also beyond that, for nurses in particular, we've put in place nurses' bursaries when they're training to become nurses. The unions asked for a training budget once they qualified. And again, as Chancellor, we put that in place to give nurses the support they need. So, look, I know things are difficult at the moment for people up and down the country with inflation. Of course, I get that. That's why we've put an enormous amount of support in place for people's energy bills. £900 this winter for a typical family. That gives you a demonstration that we care about this, and we want to find a sensible way through on pay. But I think it's entirely right for me to stand here and say that we have treated everyone reasonably and fairly, and will continue to do that.
And you enjoy the World Cup yesterday?
Yes, for the bits of it that I managed to catch in between my meetings and work, it was a fantastic World Cup final, great football match. Shame that we were not there, but in the absence of us being there, to see Mbappe and Messi go head to head was fantastic, and well deserved for Messi to get his World Cup.
Thank you, Professor.
International statesman Rishi Sunak there, speaking to our political editor Darren McCaffrey in Riga in Latvia, where he's been visiting the other nations on this joint expeditionary force. Let's get thoughts of Mark, still with us, with your defence hat on. Clearly, this is his first foray as an international statesman on this particular aspect, really wanting to send the message to Russia that they're trying to hold this unit together.
Yeah, well, Boris Johnson, of course, is seen as a very great friend of the Ukrainian government and its people. I have to say, Rishi Sunak has been as well into Kiev as well. But this visit to Latvia, very much with a message for everybody to stay the course, stand firm, keep supporting the Ukrainians in their fight to expel Russia from its territory. He was making it very clear there that there can be no negotiations with Russia as long as they continue to hold territory that they've conquered. And he's announced more in the way of ammunition that they're sending off to the Ukrainians, on top of more than £1 billion of military aid that the British government has given Ukraine in the first place, with the second biggest donor behind the United States, having sent missiles, artillery pieces and vehicles and the like. And obviously, the Ukrainian government very much appreciate that. They want more from Britain, more from America, more from other countries. But these countries, of course, we know, are dealing with domestic crises in terms of their economic situation.
And looking about how much that is costing. I mean, Kyiv obviously hit once more overnight with airstrikes, but he went on to talk about Rwanda there with Darren. Last week I set out a very comprehensive approach to stopping the boats from coming to the UK. It's not going to be easy and we're not going to be able to do it overnight, but welcoming this decision on Rwanda.
Yes, and it will be interesting to see whether they make some kind of attempt in the days ahead, weeks ahead, maybe to get a flight or two off to Rwanda before this appeal, as we expect, is launched. Certainly those that are fans of the Rwanda policy want to see it moving forward now. It's been some months since it was announced by Boris Johnson in April, but it's still got some way to go before it's finally concluded in the UK courts.
Mark, thank you for that. But let's reflect now on your story with the skipper of the fishing boat, which helped to rescue those dozens of migrants from the Channel last week, actually hitting out at UK immigration policy for what he said was making the tragedy inevitable. Raymond Strachan telling GB News that the British authorities had been acting as a migrant taxi service, encouraging ever-increasing numbers of people to make the journey. Mark has this report for us.
Out in the pitch black of the English Channel, the sound of panicked cries for help. The six-man crew of the scallop boat Arcturus rush to help as they come alongside the stricken migrant boat. These images are deeply disturbing, but they highlight the very real dangers for these flimsy vessels and the quick thinking and bravery of local fishermen turned rescuers.
If we wasn't there, there were probably 45 people dead without any trace. Nobody was knowing they was there. I looked over the side, there was about 5 or 6 migrants hanging off the side of the boat.
For Raymond's crew, it was their training and instinct to help that kicked in.
It's not an easy task to try to pull a panicking person out of the water from their fully clothed, soaking wet. When the other migrants in the dinghy seen they was getting rescued, they started swimming towards the boat.
There was, Raymond says, huge relief when the lifeboats and Coast Guard helicopters reached the scene.
It doesn't matter your political views in the migrant crisis. When you see people in the water screaming, shouting, begging for their life, if you've any compassion at all, the human nature thing to do is to rescue people. And that's what we did.
On board the Arcturus, Although these survivors were rescued, they were clearly hypothermic. The Scallop boat's crew got them out of their wet clothes and into warm showers before giving them their dry clothes and some hot food. Outside, the fast rescue boat from the Royal Navy's offshore patrol vessel HMS Severn joined in the search for other survivors. As on board the fishing boat, medics checked over those rescued. Raymond Strachan said the events of Wednesday morning were inevitable. Like all local fishing crews, they regularly see migrant boats and often have to help. Like here in January, when the Arcturus had to stand by alongside 2 inflatables near Dungeness while they waited for UK authorities to arrive on scene. And that same month, this astonishing sight of 5 young men crammed in a tiny inflatable rowing across the channel without an onboard motor and not a single life jacket among them.
I've seen 5 successful crossings last Sunday. Then you get the UK government saying they're getting send patrol boats out to stop the crossings. Well, I see the patrol boats there, but I just see them like a taxi service. That's what it is.
Although Wednesday saw tragedy in the Channel, Raymond says it won't act as a deterrent to these crossings. He and his crew expect to see many more migrant boats out here in the months ahead. Mark White, GB News.
Well, let's reflect now on the World Cup with that extraordinary final. Argentina champions after winning their first World Cup since 1986. Bit of a fairy tale ending for Lionel Messi, and a final to be remembered. 3-3, remember, extra time, and then won 4-2 on penalties. 2 goals for Messi, named player of the tournament. Kylian Mbappe scoring a hat-trick, meaning he's finishing as top scorer. And we're joined in the studio now with Aidan once more, and also sports broadcaster and journalist Chris Scudder, who's in Qatar for us, reporting. Chris, welcome to you. First of all, Chris, just remind us, you're veteran of how many World Cups and Euros now?
That was my eighth World Cup and several Euros as well. So yeah, it was fascinating to experience this one, which was very, very, very different. A lot of people have got different opinions about how well it went, but I'm sure you're going to ask me that anyway, aren't you?
Well, yeah, because certainly we remember all the politics beforehand, but that's what people are reflected on. It finished as the beautiful game with an extraordinary match for the final.
Yeah, I mean, I think when push comes to shove, it'll be remembered as the greatest final of all, probably. You know, the way it ended was just extraordinary. And for an hour, it looked as though it was going to be one of the boring ones. I mean, I've been to 4 World Cup finals, and none of them have been memorable. I go back to 2010, that terrible final between Spain and Holland, the Netherlands. But this one was brought back for me memories of the great finals, 1970. When Pele and Brazil beat Italy 4-1, and the last time Argentina won it in 86, when Maradona and his team beat West Germany, as it was then, I think 3-2, and the Germans fought back from 2-2, and then an extra time goal won it. But this had more than that. I mean, it just felt to me like 2 heavyweight boxers slugging it out in the 15th round. It was just extraordinary. And France, I feel so sorry for the young lad, Mouani, who came on as a substitute, a 24-year-old who plays his club football in Germany. And the goal opened up for him in the dying seconds. And it had just to beat the goalkeeper to go down into World Cup folklore and win the World Cup for his country. And he missed it. And of course, it cost them the whole thing. An extraordinary final, it really was, yeah.
Yeah, Aidan here in the studio too. We were, looking forward to the 2 M's, Mbappe versus Messi. Mbappe's so quiet for that first half. Everyone thinking, oh, is it this virus that's been talked about in the camp that's hit him? And then suddenly he burst into life in that second half.
But that's just what world-class players do. I mean, he was fairly dormant for the first half, along with the rest of his teammates. There was speculation they might be afflicted by this virus. Had there been a big stage management process the night before, when all the 24 players were put out to train, to show a display of unity, that nobody was crocked or anything like that, although Olivier Giroud had a bit of a knock. But then they go into the game, it looks as if that maybe they'd underplayed it, maybe they were being laid low by it because Argentina was so dominant. That actually carried on into the second half. Argentina looked comfortable for most of the second half as well.
A lot of people switched off, apparently, think, oh, that's it, it's all done and dusted.
They did. It was a remnant of 1986 final, when Argentina went quite comfortably 2-0 ahead, and then Briegel and Rummenigge brought West Germany back into it before Burruchaga scored the winning goal. Also reminiscent of 1979 FA Cup final. They call it the 5-minute FA Cup final, the 5-minute final, because everything happened in the last 5 minutes. The other 85 was pretty forgettable.
And then going the distance, everyone thought maybe Messi would sort of run out of steam. He was still, playmaking and a danger right to the very end.
Yeah, and again, he gambled for that goal as well. I mean, he was, people say he doesn't have the legs or the extra yard of pace that he had maybe 5-6 years ago, but he was in that 6-yard box to finish off that goal. I thought that would be enough. I even thought it might be chalked off, but no, it wasn't to be, and he prevailed in the penalty shootout.
And Chris, let's address what might have been. Perhaps even if England had made it to the final, would they have been good enough, particularly when we see how other people take penalties?
Yeah, it's so frustrating, isn't it? You look at the way France played the first hour, and I think Aidan's right. I mean, I think that the illness did play some kind of part there. But England were as good as anybody, I think, in this tournament, minus that very top star quality that Mbappe and Messi both brought. But they just need to learn now how to win the big games against the big teams, because you can look at Gareth Southgate's record, and he has won more knockout games than anybody for a long time for England, but they're all against teams who are below them. They just have this mental block. I don't know what it is. They cannot get over the line against the likes of France.
I think, Chris, the phrase I heard was flat track bullies.
Yeah, Aidan was saying flat track bullies, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They can beat the teams around them and below them, but they can't seem to beat anybody who are bigger, especially in the knockout games when it gets really...
And that, what, psychological?
I think, well, yes, I do think it's psychological. Sam Allardyce, when he took over the England job back in 2016, said the biggest problem watching from afar, and he was big into his psychology at a club game, he said that these players have a mental block when it comes to seeing the job through. Right. Roy Keane made a good point yesterday as well about devilment. I made the point last week as well. Argentina picked up loads of bookings. They showed they will do anything to win these matches. We saw it against Holland in the quarter-final, and yesterday England, by contrast, got one booking in the entire tournament.
But here's an interesting statistic, Chris, that I picked up. PA have worked out that English-based players accounted for a quarter of the minutes played at the World Cup. Premier League, the leading division, a total of 33,786 minutes share between 121 players. And then one thinks of, like, McAllister playing for Argentina, a Brighton and Hove Albion player, would you believe? And, let's applaud them for that. But clearly, domestically, we've got the best league perhaps in the world. We can't translate it into international football.
It's been ever thus, Mark. I mean, the English Premier League has been the best for a long time. It's interesting, all the foreign players, they sort of criticise English football for not having quite the level of skill, and that's always been a problem in the past. But that has been addressed now. The arrival of St George's Park, which has been there for a long time now, has brought the skill level up. And when you marry that up to the physicality of the English game, it's a very potent combination. It's not coincidence that these players come to England, because they love the pace of the game. I personally think that the time is coming. I really think so. I do. The next Euros and the next World Cup are going to be a great, great chance for England. But, Gareth Southgate, devilment's a great word. Just be a bit, not be quite so nice. Just get it sorted out. England are as good as anybody. Trust me, they are.
Well, we'll get your judgment at the Euros if you head out there, hopefully. Aidan, just looking at a certain tweet from Jack Grealish. Wow, what am I seeing? Double question. I mean, is there actually an element that they've been a little bit over-coached, over-trained? They haven't got that individual flair?
Not really. Someone else said to me, a colleague of mine, another journalist, said they've been over-coached, but I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, how much time I mean, this is a tournament where the coaches got less time than ever with their players. If you're talking about over-coached at club level, well, they're mixed in with players players who starred for other countries at this World Cup. It didn't really affect them, including Argentina and France yesterday, where there was heavy representation in the Premier League. So I don't think it's that. It's just a bit of know-how. Usually when a team wins a tournament, like Germany in 2014, it's because they've been knocking on the door for a number of years. You think back to Germany's trajectory, they had that great reset after Euro 2000. It wasn't until 2008 that they got to the Euro final. They started going deep into World Cup tournaments as well, and they finally crossed the line with the youngish team in 2014. And so I think England, having followed that model, and they do respect what the German FA did in that period, I think they're following it, and don't be surprised if it happens, because England are there or thereabouts, as Chris said.
OK. The other thought, Chris, with you having been out there, of course, is FIFA maybe breathing a sigh of relief now after all the publicity beforehand about human rights, about workers and so on and so forth. It has been a successful World Cup.
Yeah, Gianni Infantino, you could see him purring yesterday. I mean, on the rostrum, getting in the way of all the dignitaries there as well. But listen, you can't argue that I knew that the Qataris would make it a real charm offensive. The stadiums were amazing. The organisation, for me, was far too over the top. But they really put on a projection of power, and the football followed, because it was fantastic. And, they'll hide behind that. But let us not forget everything else. The LGBT issues, the human rights. I was out there. I met one Qatari person. Everybody working out there were on contracts. They were from foreign countries, from the Middle East, from Africa, from the subcontinent, all over the place. And they were lovely people. But, he's talked about hypocrisy. Infantino, that famous speech at the start of the tournament.
Yeah.
Well, the rainbow armbands. What happened when the Moroccans suddenly started waving the Palestine flag? And Infantino said not a word about that. Let's keep politics out of football. So lots of hypocrisy there as well. I saw Arab men drinking in bars as well, openly. These things go on. He who cast the first stone and all that. But I think Infantino will hide behind the fact that it was a very successful football tournament, which I think it was always going to be.
OK, I think that's what they call a score draw from the both of you. So thank you very much indeed. No, you want to go into extra time, don't you?
I see enough of Chris, it's fine.
Yeah, OK, I'll have to penalise you for that. Gentlemen, thank you both very much. An extra chapter for your book there, Chris. You're watching GB News Live. Coming up, more in the final hour of the programme. Will Elon Musk actually quit as the boss of Twitter? Find out after the break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. you've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's just gone 2 and you're with GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up in this hour, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has been challenged over the state of the NHS by the mother of a child ill in hospital as nurses and ambulance workers now prepare for further strike action. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the Baltic region to urge fellow leaders to stand firm in their support for Ukraine. He's pledged new aid to guard against Russian aggression. We'll get the views of a former senior British Army officer. And could Elon Musk be on his way out of Twitter already? 57% of users of the platform voting in favour of him stepping down. But will he actually go? We'll have the views of tech journalist and an Elon expert. And as ever, let us know what you think of all the issues of the day. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before that, the latest headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon to you. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister's welcomed the High Court's ruling that the Rwanda migrant plan is lawful, saying he's pleased at the decision. The Royal Courts of Justice has ruled that the policy sending asylum seekers who came to the UK illegally to claim asylum in Rwanda is consistent with the International Refugee Convention. The government's faced legal challenges which have prevented, so far, any flights from actually taking off. Charities have vowed to appeal today's decision, claiming the East African nation lacks a fair and efficient asylum system. Steve Valdez-Simmons, director at Amnesty International UK, told GB News he thinks it's a disappointing decision.
The more that is put into simply stopping people making journeys, rather than providing them the means to not need to make the journey, either finding safety in France or finding a safe way of getting to the UK, the more we just go down the way we're going at the moment, the more dangerous the journeys are going to get, the more out of sight they are going to be attempted, and the more lives that will be put at risk.
The skipper of the fishing boat, which helped rescue dozens of migrants from the Channel last week, has hit out at UK immigration policy for making the tragedy, he says, inevitable. The government says it has a legal duty to pick up anyone in distress in the Channel. The skipper, Raymond Strachan, told GB News British authorities have been acting as a migrant taxi service, encouraging ever-increasing numbers of people to make the journey.
Look at the same patrol boats out to stop the crossings. Well, I see the patrol boats there, but I just see them like a taxi service. That's what it is.
The Nurses' Union says the Health Secretary will have to carry the can if patients suffer as a result of NHS strikes. Steve Barclay says he's open to talks with Unite ahead of strike action, but suggested the government won't budge on pay. The unions threaten further industrial action in the new year if ministers don't respond to their demands within 48 hours of tomorrow's walkouts. The Prime Minister says the government's doing all it can to handle the disruption.
I'm really disappointed to see that the unions are calling these strikes, particularly at Christmas, particularly when it has such an impact on people's day-to-day lives with the disruption it causes and the impact on their health. And I'd urge them to keep considering whether these strikes are really necessary and do everything they can to alleviate the impact it's going to have on people. And of course, the government, for its part, is being responsible in putting in place contingency measures to make sure we're well prepared to handle the disruption that is coming.
The Prime Minister has called on Northern European allies to stand firm in their support of Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has told fellow leaders in Latvia that it's an incredibly important time for the Defence Alliance to come together. He also stressed the importance of maintaining severe economic consequences on Russia. An inquest has heard the 4 boys who fell into a frozen lake in Solihull died from drowning. The children aged between 6 and 11 were taken to hospital in a critical condition after being pulled from the water. The incident happened over a week ago. A number of vigils have been held over the past 7 days to pay tribute. Jeremy Clarkson has apologised for comments he made about the Duchess of Sussex. Over 6,000 complaints were made to the press regulator over an article he wrote in a newspaper column in which he said he hated the Duchess on a cellular level. Clarkson wrote on Twitter this afternoon, "I'm horrified to have caused so much hurt and I should be more careful in the future." Network Rail's warning strikes by railway workers will cause needless misery by severely disrupting services over the festive period. Thousands of RMT members will walk out from 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve until the 27th of December. The RAC has said traffic will be especially bad on Friday and Saturday in light of the strikes. 20 million cars are estimated to hit the motorway at its peak. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thank you very much indeed. So, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, confronted by the mother of a sick child on a visit to hospital just a day before another nurses' strike is due to get underway. Further walkouts by ambulance workers due, of course, later this week. Well, the Health Secretary was visiting King's College University Hospital in London when he met the mother of a 3-year-old girl with cystic fibrosis. This is what Sarah Pennington-Old said about the care of her daughter, Lucy.
We have some brilliant experts, and they're being worked to the bone, you know, and actually the level of care they provide is amazing, but they're not being able to provide it in the way they want to provide it because the resourcing is not there, you know. Like I said, on Monday we reduced the inn, and the number of people coming through the door is too many, and it's not fair to blame it on the pandemic anymore, is it? Because actually we had problems in the NHS before we went into the pandemic. We were short of doctors, we were short of beds going into the pandemic. So I think it's really wrong to blame it on the pandemic. And actually, the damage that you're doing to families like myself is terrible.
The Health Secretary not responding to that at that particular stage, but ahead of the various strikes, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has insisted that the government is acting fairly and reasonably over public sector pay. Let's remind ourselves what he had to say a little earlier when questioned on a visit to Latvia.
Well, it's really important to me that the government is always acting reasonably and indeed fairly and making the right long-term decisions for the country. And that's been our approach throughout the pay-setting negotiations with the public sector. Now, our door is always open. The Health Secretary has been very clear with that. Of course, we're always happy to sit down and talk to people to try and work through difficult challenges like this. That's always been the case. Now, when it comes to pay, it's because these things are difficult that we have an independent process. We have an independent body that makes recommendations to the government about what reasonable and fair pay settlements are. Now, the government accepted those recommendations in full across the public sector, even though in many cases those recommendations were higher than what the government had originally suggested, and indeed higher than what many people in the private sector were receiving. But the government increased its offer so it could accept those independent recommendations in full. I thought that was the reasonable and the fair thing to do, because it's really important that we combat inflation. It's inflation which is making everybody in the UK's life difficult. I'm determined to grip inflation, to reduce it, and part of us doing that is having a responsible and fair approach to pay, and that's what we're doing.
Let's get more with our political reporter, Olivia Utley, joining us in the studio. Olivia, we'll come to this mantra, if you like, about inflation and the independent pay review in a moment. But first, just to touch on what the mum had said, Sarah Pennington-Old, to the Health Secretary. We didn't get a response from the Health Secretary to that, but an indication perhaps about how difficult this is for the government to balance, that at some stage, maybe, the Health Secretary will have to acknowledge the public unease about what's happening with the nurses in particular.
Yes, and it seems as though what the government has been hoping for is that sympathy for the strikers will start to ebb away as people see how these strikes are going to affect their families. But that doesn't really seem to be happening yet. Although people aren't so supportive of the rail strikers as they were even a few months ago, support for the nurses still seems high, and blame for what's happening seems to be with the government, which is exactly what Rishi Sunak and Steve Barclay don't want. Steve Barclay, there's been a little bit of a change in tone in the last few days. Up until last week, at least, he was playing the sort of hard man and was seen perfectly happy to have a pretty tense relationship with Pat Cullen. He kept repeating that 19% mantra. Today, he said that he would be prepared to reopen talks with Pat Cullen, but he's been given very little wiggle room from number 10. Rishi Sunak seems to have rejected the suggestion of giving a one-off payment to nurses, which is what's happened in Scotland, which has managed to avert strikes. But obviously it would be far more expensive to do that for nurses across England. And Sunak keeps reiterating that any sort of major pay rise for nurses would lead to an inflationary spiral.
Yeah, and again, he stuck to that line when he was questioned there in Latvia on this international visit. But there are economists who say, actually, public sector pay does not necessarily feed through immediately into an inflationary spiral. Clearly, what the government might be worried about is the precedent this sets across the board, because there are so many different parts now seeking above inflation pay deals.
Well, exactly, and it sort of illustrates the government's point, the fact that there are strikes for the whole of this week. So it's difficult to imagine the Prime Minister saying yes to a 19% pay rise for nurses and then not having to replicate across the rest of the
So you move on one, you have to move on all.
Exactly, and we are now seeing inflation is actually beginning to go down a little bit, going down a little bit faster than we expected, down to 10.7, I think, rather than 10.9 this month. And that's the trajectory which the government is working very hard to continue. And they're very, very reluctant to do anything which will mitigate against that.
Just one other aspect to this, and that is that we've got the ambulance stoppage as well. Soldiers being brought in, 2,500 soldiers to run public services at £10 million a week. However, the senior military figure in charge of this said, we're not spare capacity, we're busy, we've got focus on our primary role. They're pretty unhappy at having been put in the front line of public services.
Yeah, there's massive disgruntlement among the armed forces for being treated as the kind of silver bullet to solve the problem. And I can't remember who it was, but another senior army...
Admiral Sir Tony Radicun, yes, that's the one, yeah.
And... last week, I think it was him, perhaps someone else was saying that the army is not used as a last resort anymore. It's basically the first lever that the government pulls when there is a problem. And of course, the army, by law, isn't allowed to strike. So there's a general feeling of unfairness, particularly in the lower ranks of the army, that there are people having to give up their Christmases to fill in for workers who are actually paid more than they're paid. So you can imagine a situation where you've got rising... disillusionment in the armed forces, as well as everything else that the government's trying to contend
A real
with.
winter of discontent. Yeah, Olivia, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, let's reflect a little more on what the Prime Minister said, using that trip to the Baltic to urge fellow leaders to stand firm in their support for Ukraine. He pledged a new stream of defence aid to guard against Russian aggression this afternoon, saying there was widespread support, though, for Ukraine, but calling on counterparts to sustain or even boost their current help. The Prime Minister will be travelling to Estonia next to meet British troops there and then sign a technology digital partnership with the country's Prime Minister. Let's speak now to former British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon joining us. Thank you very much indeed for your time once more, Hamish. Just looking at the sort of details of what we understand may be on the shopping list initially, particularly artillery pieces, and we've heard about how effective it has been in terms of outstripping Russian kit. But is there a danger if we go into further long-range weapons that the Russian would see this as being offensive rather than defensive?
Well, I'm not sure that's the case. I'm delighted that Rishi Sunak is in the Balkans. Hopefully he is visiting those troops who are on the front line, keeping us safe back here in this country. But also it's crucial that we maintain the support of the rest of NATO, and particularly those European countries, because Putin is now trying to fracture that support. He's trying to elongate this conflict. He thinks that if he can take the conflict into the middle of next year, then support from countries like Germany and France will waver, and ourselves, and of course the Americans, by the middle of next year will be thinking about elections, and then it will fracture. Putin, wants a stalemate. And I think we're at a tipping point. And the weaponry that you talked about, this long-range artillery, it is making a difference. The Ukrainians are winning. And if we can enable them to win, particularly if we can enable them to take Crimea this winter, then that could well bring the Russians to the negotiation table. Right. So we must step it up at all costs.
However, we understand Kyiv hit again overnight this time with air raids, and again it seems to be hitting infrastructure, power supply and so on. Are we giving the Ukrainians enough air defence equipment?
Well, we need to give them a range of capability, and certainly the air defence is key to protecting civilians and also protecting the infrastructure that, again, that we've discussed before. Putin is trying to turn the lights off and turn the heat off in Ukraine, and it's the weather there is getting pretty cold and freezing, and civilians are suffering terribly. So it's a range of capability. The air defence has been key. It would appear that the Ukrainian military are taking out between 75 and 80% of cruise missiles that are fired into places like Kyiv. But it's important that we keep that up and also give them the other weaponry, like long-range artillery, and the ammunition required so that they can keep prosecuting their advances throughout the winter, so that we can bring this to a close as quickly as possible, because the Russians, or Putin rather, is trying to elongate it, to fracture the support that hopefully the Prime Minister is negotiating with his other leaders in the Balkans at the moment.
And what do you make of this assessment that Putin might try again to go for Kyiv from the north and use Belarus and additional forces that they may actually supply to him?
Well, there's an awful lot of rumour going around at the moment. Yeah. And the fact that a lot of senior people in Putin's government are in Belarus at the moment and discussing these sort of plans, who knows, it might be a ruse. We saw how they were defeated completely at the beginning of the war by trying to take Kyiv. I expect it is more a ruse to try and get the Ukrainians and NATO off balance. I am sure our intelligence is very, very good, and any move to the north or from the north would be picked up. So I expect it slightly diversionary, but we must be on the balls of our feet all of the time. And we must give the Ukrainians all they need to prevail, because your previous discussions about the cost of living crisis and strikes in this country, quite frankly, it is the defeat of the Russians in Ukraine that will get us back on the level playing field, get inflation down and get the economy moving again. Quite frankly, if we don't achieve that, all the rest of it is virtually irrelevant.
Last thought on this. Clearly, there may have been some discussion behind closed doors, but what happens if and when Putin is defeated, or actually he is removed, perhaps by his own people in the Kremlin?
Well, I think generally that's what everybody hopes, but I'm sure a lot of other commentators have also suggested, we don't know what comes after Putin, and it's probably not going to be any better. However,
exactly.
The Russian military is pretty much defeated and, quite frankly, is no match for NATO anymore. So whoever comes in and replaces Putin, they are going to take over a defeated military and a broken military too. So it's very important that we continue to show unity across NATO and across Europe and remain on the high ground and get a peace as soon as we can. And quite frankly, whoever replaces Putin, we will then need to deal with. But the Russians are going to be in a lot worse position than they were before this war started.
Hamish, thanks for joining us once again on GB News and bringing us your assessment. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get more on the political aspect of this now. Tom is with us in the studio, and clearly we have been more used to seeing Boris Johnson meeting President Zelensky and being the international statesman. It's new territory for Rishi Sunak.
It is. He's only made a couple of visits, of course, abroad as Prime Minister. We always have seen him in a domestic role, focusing on the domestic economy, whilst his perhaps political... I think foes might be too far a word, but certainly when the leadership contest was taking place over the summer, it was Liz Truss who had the photographs in Moscow, who had met with all the world leaders, who had the sort of hinterland on Ukraine and on Russia and on China and all the other big issues of the day. Rishi Sunak focusing much more on domestic affairs. But now, of course, he has met with President Zelensky out in Kiev. That was a few weeks ago. He's also met with the G20 world leaders out in Bali. He's been to Sharm el-Sheikh for the COP27 conference. And now, of course, he is in Latvia and Estonia today, meeting with these JEF world leaders, these sort of Northern European leaders who are behind this British coalition of Northern European security.
And, of course, you know, what that might mean for NATO expansion with Sweden and Finland also, you know, understandably wanting to have more security. But how comfortable will he be on signing the bills for all this, bearing in mind that he's been pretty parsimonious in the past? And there are indications that he's wanting, you were saying, to have some kind of assessment on what we've actually sent and spent.
There were some reports over the weekend that Rishi Sunak has asked for some sort of audit of Ukraine support. There were suggestions that he wants a dashboard drawn up within Number 10. Now, it must be said, today the Downing Street spokesman has said that that's not the case, denied those reports specifically about a dashboard. But we haven't had a firm denial on whether or not there was an audit asked for. And that's raised some eyebrows, of course, because Boris Johnson and indeed Liz Truss were both very bullish in their support for Ukraine, pushing down orthodoxy, pushing against the sort of treasury mindset that often wants to count the pennies before leading the support. Indeed. And it's interesting, Rishi Sunak really pushing back against that narrative today, in his words, in Latvia. And, of course, no doubt we'll hear more from him in Estonia a bit later. But it is interesting whether we will see that same level of support continue. Boris Johnson was seen internationally as that great friend of Ukraine. And whether or not Rishi Sunak will be continuing in that mould, I think, remains to be seen.
He was inevitably asked about the strikes. Of course, we've got nurses and ambulance drivers this week. He's sticking to this mantra on public service pay and the link to inflation. But there are quite a few economists saying, well, actually, it doesn't directly feed into inflation in terms of public sector pay, even though it may actually lead to others wanting more, and then you get into that spiral. Are we getting an indication they're going to try and tough it out over Christmas?
That's certainly where it seems to be at the moment. The government think they've got a relatively strong story to tell. There's a soundbite, for example, that every 1% of pay that nurses asked for costs taxpayers £700 million. Now, at a time when, frankly, there isn't much money, taxes are the highest they have ever been on record in this country. And we've seen in the last few months what happens if the government tries to borrow more money. The markets do not like it.
Take fright.
So it is fascinating to see, really, there is very little wiggle room here in terms of where money may be raised. The government will be continuing to make that case, and today, seemingly pushing back against notions that there might be some sort of one-off payment or whatever. They're trying to stay the course, but the question is, can they do that if there's more strikes in January, perhaps pushing through
and if public
into
sentiment
spring as well?
turns as well, of course, that's the other issue. Tom, as ever, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, still to come, more on the migrant policy with another Mark White exclusive, speaking to the skipper who rescued the dozens of migrants from the Channel last week, and his criticism of UK immigration policy. But before that, what's happening on the weather? From the freeze to the flood, it seems.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. You've probably noticed it's a lot milder out there. It's also wetter and windier than it has been, and wet and windy weather usually means low pressure is nearby. We've got a big one here, and it is spiralling round, gusty winds and weather fronts bringing areas of rain across pretty much all parts. We'll certainly see some heavier rain overnight across parts of the south. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place covering parts of southern England, but much of the Midlands and eastern England will also stay overcast through the night with rain at times, and the same goes for South Wales. Further north, drier conditions, blustery showers in the far northwest, but we'll see some clearer spells over northern England, parts of Scotland. That will allow temperatures to drop, actually. Could even be a touch of frost in rural areas, but with all the cloud and the rain across the southeast, a very mild night here. A wet start across parts of eastern England to tomorrow, but pretty quickly that should be out of the way, and then most places looking dry and bright on Tuesday. A few showers for North Wales, North West England, plenty of showers across the Highlands of Scotland, snow on the hills and gusty winds here. But elsewhere, the winds lighter than today, a bit of sunshine, feeling pleasant enough. Temperatures a touch above average, lower than today, but obviously much higher than they were for most of last week, still getting up to 9 to 11 Celsius. Through Tuesday evening, I think we'll see one or two showers continuing, certainly heavy ones across the northwest of Scotland. But then later on through the night, we're looking at some more wet weather pushing in across England, Wales, perhaps southern Scotland too. Some uncertainty about when that will clear, but it should scoot away from eastern parts of England during Wednesday. Then brighter skies to the west, but more showers on Wednesday for northern England, Wales, and certainly the showers packing in across Scotland and Northern Ireland throughout the day with a blustery day here as well. Temperatures again just dropping a touch, generally about 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. That's all from me for now. Goodbye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's bring you some breaking news on Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Remember them? Well, we're getting reports that they have settled the defamation claims against each other, of course. Just to remind you that they had sued and countersued. So the court in Fairfax, Virginia, had, even though it came out this year on Depp's side, she was ordered to pay $10 million in compensatory damages and then $365,000 in punitive damages. Then Depp had been ordered to give her $2 million by the same courtroom after she countersued for defamation. Well, lawyers for both sides have been locked in talks since then. We're being told that their legal teams have actually come to an agreement that she wants to put the unfortunate episode behind her. In a statement posted on Instagram, she said that she had lost all faith of getting justice in the American legal system. Having sold her home in LA to help fund legal action, she didn't want to risk losing even more. So the settlement basically means that her insurance company will take on the debt of paying Johnny Depp $1 million, putting an end to all their court proceedings. The statement on Instagram has gone on to say that she, after a great deal of deliberation, had decided to settle the issues. It's important for me to say that I never chose this. I defended my truth, and in doing so, my life as I knew it was destroyed. As far as Johnny Depp is concerned, we're expecting for him to put his own statement out imminently. We'll give you that as it arrives. Now, in other legal issues, the High Court has ruled that the government's planned policy of sending Channel asylum seekers to Rwanda was lawful. Well, meanwhile, the skipper of the fishing boat, which helped rescue dozens of migrants from the Channel last week, has angrily hit out at the UK's immigration policy for making what he said the tragedy inevitable. In his first full interview since then, Raymond Strachan told GB News that the British authorities had been acting as a migrant taxi service, encouraging ever-increasing numbers to make the journey. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has obtained more exclusive images of the rescue operation, a warning you might find parts of his report upsetting.
Out in the pitch black of the English Channel, the sound of panicked cries for help. The six-man crew of the scallop boat Arcturus rush to help as they come alongside the stricken migrant boat. These images are deeply disturbing, but they highlight the very real dangers for these flimsy vessels and the quick thinking and bravery of local fishermen turned rescuers.
If we wasn't there, probably 45 people dead without any trace. Nobody was knowing they was there. I looked over the side, there was about 5 or 6 migrants hanging off the side of the boat.
For Raymond's crew, it was their training and instinct to help that kicked in.
It's not an easy task to try to pull a panicking person out of the water when they're fully clothed, soaking wet. When the other migrants in the dinghy seen they was getting rescued, they started swimming towards the boat.
There was, Raymond says, huge relief when the lifeboats and Coast Guard helicopters reached the scene.
It doesn't matter your political views in the migrant crisis. When you see people in the water screaming, shouting, begging for their life, if you've any compassion at all, the human nature thing to do is to rescue people. And that's what we did.
On board the Arcturus, although these survivors were rescued, they were clearly hypothermic. The scallop boat's crew got them out of their wet clothes and into warm showers before giving them their dry clothes and some hot food. Outside, the fast rescue boat from the Royal Navy's offshore patrol vessel HMS Severn joined in the search for other survivors. As on board the fishing boat, medics checked over those rescued. Raymond Strachan said the events of Wednesday morning were inevitable. Like all local fishing crews, they regularly see migrant boats and often have to help. Like here in January, when the Arcturus had to stand by alongside 2 inflatables near Dungeness while they waited for UK authorities to arrive on scene. And that same month, this astonishing sight of 5 young men crammed in a tiny inflatable rowing across the channel without an onboard motor and not a single life jacket among them.
I've seen 5 successful crossings last Sunday. Then you get the UK government saying they're sending patrol boats out to stop the crossings. Well, I see the patrol boats there, but I just see them like a taxi service. That's what it is.
Although Wednesday saw tragedy in the Channel, Raymond says it won't act as a deterrent to these crossings. He and his crew expect to see many more migrant boats out here in the months ahead. Mark White, GB News.
Another Mark White exclusive. Now, the people have spoken. Twitter users have voted for Elon Musk to go in his own poll. We'll be discussing if he really will honour the results and what could that mean for the social platform. First, let's get an update on the news headlines with Rosie.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 2:34. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Prime Minister has welcomed the High Court's ruling that the Rwanda migrant plan is lawful, saying he's pleased at the decision. The Royal Courts of Justice has ruled the policy of sending asylum seekers who came to the UK illegally to then claim asylum in Rwanda is consistent with International Refugee Convention. The government's faced legal challenges which have prevented any flights from taking off. Charities have vowed to appeal today's decision, claiming the East African nation lacks a fair and efficient asylum system. Steve Valdez-Simmons, director at Amnesty International, told GB News he thinks it's a disappointing decision. The mother of a 3-year-old girl has criticised the Health Secretary on the eve of nationwide nurses' strike. The nurses' unions threaten further industrial action in the new year if ministers don't respond to their demands within 48 hours of tomorrow's walkout. Steve Barclay says he's open to talks with Unite ahead of strike action, but suggested the government won't budge on pay. The mother told Mr Barclay at a hospital in South London it's unfair to blame resourcing issues on the pandemic.
We had problems in the NHS before we went into the pandemic. We were short of doctors, we were short of beds going into the pandemic. So I think it's really wrong to blame it on the pandemic. And actually, the damage that you're doing to families like myself is terrible.
Jeremy Clarkson has apologised for comments he made about the Duchess of Sussex. Over 6,000 complaints were made to the press regulator over an article he wrote in a newspaper column in which he said he hated the Duchess on a cellular level. Clarkson wrote on Twitter this afternoon, "I'm horrified to have caused so much hurt. I should be more careful in the future." TV, online and DAB+ radio, you're up to date on GB News.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Elon Musk could be stepping down as chief executive of Twitter after users of his own social media platform voted in favour of him going. 57.5% of more than 17 million voters said yes, after Musk posted a poll asking if he should stand down as leader. And he has vowed to honour the result, the billionaire facing much criticism since taking the helm after a number of controversial decisions. Let's talk now to technology journalist Will Guyat joining us. Will, thank you very much for being with us. Yes from them. Will it be a yes from Musk, though?
God knows. I think the reality of this is Elon Musk has already said in court in the US that he did not intend to stay as boss of Twitter for long. And it's also clear if you look at Tesla, his car company, which has seen its value fall massively, that there are issues there with investors suggesting he hasn't got time to do all these jobs that he's trying to do, because currently he's CEO of Tesla, Twitter and SpaceX. We've got the mission of flying man to Mars, don't forget. So there's some quite big lofty issues here, and dealing with everything he's dealing with at Twitter is probably not the top of their investors' lists. That's the challenge we face here. So hard to know what's going to happen from here. I think he already had a plan to leave. Whether or not this speeds up his exit depends, and he's a massive egotist, as you'll see by any of his posts. This will have hurt him, regardless of where he sits on this and what he says afterwards. He was hoping he would become the people's champion when it came to the world of technology. But with the missteps and the mistakes made, just in 48 hours, some of the mistakes they've made, people are beginning to think that perhaps Elon Musk wasn't the bastion of free speech, wasn't really going to transform Twitter from being this den of left-wing iniquity, which is what he suggested it was when he came in, and it was still going to be faced with all kinds of similar problems.
Yeah, and let's not forget he's sunk, was it $44 billion into this, so clearly he's going to want to overlook what's happening. But we're just looking at what former members of Twitter staff have said, who were sort of unceremoniously sacked. Basically, he's showing himself to be the incompetent fool we all knew he was. There's a reassessment of his business acumen as well.
Well, it's tricky, right? I cannot come on to GB News and say Elon Musk is not a savvy businessman, given that he created the company PayPal, he sold that, made money there, got into Tesla. Didn't found Tesla, by the way, wasn't the founder of that company, but has been involved and has made some savvy decisions all the way through and was the world's richest man for a period of time. Now, he is no longer the world's richest man, but don't worry, he's still got something in the region of $285 billion. So you don't need to worry too much about him being out on the street this Christmas. He's not universally liked, though. This is the problem, and for many people they'd say, so what, it doesn't matter, you don't have to be universally liked. But what he's tried to do here with Twitter, and I think he's failed, is court this kind of public opinion, be seen as a kind of a tech leader and a joker at the same time, doing all of these things in the public sphere. We shouldn't forget that he did that poll to say, should I stay or should I go, just moments after the end of the World Cup final in Qatar, where he was watching the game. Now, just 24 hours before that, he'd suggested that people couldn't post his location on Twitter because it was a breach of terms and they get blocked. And just 24 hours later, he's happily proclaiming he's enjoying the hospitality in Qatar and watching the football. So there's so many contradictions in this man's life.
So therefore, could we think that this is a bit of a sucker punch, that he'd already decided to go, and this is just a way of getting publicity for the platform and creating all the interest around it again?
you've hit the nail on the head. He fired all of the PR people when he went in and took over the company. There are no PR people at Twitter anymore. He is generating billions of dollars of value in terms of PR value for the company just by tweeting and saying things on the platform. He certainly understands how that works. We know that much. But what happens over the next few weeks? Are we going to see a new boss at Twitter before Christmas? What's next? I really couldn't tell you. And I've worked in technology for 20 years and I've been following Elon Musk and Twitter ever since this started. It's like a roller coaster. I said buckle in to start with. It's going to be the greatest fairground ride you've ever experienced, but not for the people who work there. And I've been right so far all the way through that.
Right, the merry-go-round continues, or is it a Big Dipper? Who knows? Will, thank you very much indeed for joining us, bringing us your reaction to that. Well, let's talk about more Big Dippers. Britain's leading business group, the CBI, revealing that manufacturers have reported their sharpest drop in output in more than 2 years. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, is with us with On the Money. No, still can't afford the music. Never mind. I did try, however.
You did.
Yeah, we need a little sort of accordion or something. Now, this is yet another part of the snapshot telling us that, you know, we've got this recession and it's going to be with us for some time.
So I often come on here, Mark, and report official figures from the Office for National Statistics and so on. These aren't official figures. This is a survey by the Confederation of British Industry, but it is a very authoritative survey. It covers lots and lots of manufacturing companies. And what it shows is the sharpest slowdown in manufacturing for 2 years. So that's since the depths of lockdown. And we can see it here. The CBI is saying in the last quarter, that's quarter of a year, October to December, output was down in 11 of 17 manufacturing subsectors, if you like. And that was a survey of 220 firms up and down the length of the UK. And we can see here, Anna Leach, she's a CBI economist, says the corrosive effect of higher inflation on demand is increasingly clear. Manufacturing output contracted at the fastest pace in 2 years over the last quarter. Some global price pressures have eased in recent months. Cost and price inflation will likely remain very high in the near term, with rising energy bills a key concern for manufacturers. Having said that, I wouldn't say it's all doom and gloom. I'm hearing increasingly from business owners, business leaders who email me, phone me up, I talk to them, it's my job, saying that while inflation isn't going to fall off a cliff immediately, they are detecting fewer or less severe marks, supply chain price pressures. The supply chain price pressures that are still there after lockdown. And what we've also heard, and the Treasury is now talking about this a bit more, there'll be an announcement hopefully before Christmas. We've heard that the Treasury's support scheme for businesses, energy support scheme for businesses, will be extended beyond this coming April 2023 to April 2024.
So another year, which was what we had originally from the Liz Truss and
indeed.
Kwasi-Kwarteng budget.
It's not as open-ended as the Liz Truss Kwasi-Kwarteng energy support package. It will be the cap where the prices are set per unit cost of electricity will be higher, so the state won't have to pay so much money to subsidise. And also, the Treasury's got to flesh out the detail, and I think we're expecting that detail in the next 48 hours or so. It will only focus on certain sectors, so energy-intensive steel makers and so on. But also, I'm hearing the hospitality industry. They're going to get a bit of relief on their energy bills, not least because 1 in 10 British workers are employed in hospitality.
Yeah, and of course, you know, they're worrying at the moment, this golden quarter, whether they're actually going to make the money because of all the strikes and so on. But this is very important because it gives all these businesses certainty. They can try and work out the route ahead for the year with an indication that we're still going to be in recession perhaps for the whole year, even though it might not be that deep. It's going to be long but not deep.
So what the CBI are saying today, and also, as we spoke earlier, KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms, they've brought out a report. They're basically agreeing with the Bank of England. Now, the Bank of England has predicted a long recession, economic contraction, but not a particularly deep recession, but still painful. A lot less deep than the recession that was linked to lockdown when GDP fell by 10%, or the 2008 financial crisis recession when GDP fell by about 6%. They're looking at a 1 or 2% fall in GDP over a long period of time, the overall size of our economy. But the likes of the CBI, the likes of KPMG, economists there never lost their job for agreeing with the Bank of England, right? So there's a sort of herd effect going on.
Groupthink.
And just like I was an outlier when I said this time last year that the UK was going to face a lot of inflation, I said it on GB News repeatedly and in my Telegraph column, I actually think that this CBI prediction, this KPMG prediction, and indeed the Bank of England prediction, I think they're a little bit too gloomy, if I'm honest.
Right.
I think there are signs of, specks of light out there in terms of the economy.
The green shoots, as we call them, yeah.
Unemployment is still low. There are still a lot of vacancies around, though not always in the parts of the country or offering the jobs that people want, Mark, as we discussed earlier. But I see business investment is holding up. There's a lot of cash on the sidelines that's waiting to come in to expand businesses, Mark, once there is some kind of stability and certainty. Not just political stability, but stability in terms of energy prices and, crucially, linked to the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Now, key to this, obviously, is going to be the inflation rate. Also, and you've written about this weekend in the Telegraph, the pound and where that goes against the dollar. I mean, KPMG saying inflation will still maybe be hitting 7%. That's a higher estimate than some people.
Yeah.
And this is very important because this ties into all these demands from the unions, particularly on the public sector
big
pay.
time.
I mean, it could well be that if the government decides to hold out, they're looking at inflation rate dipping quite markedly into the spring and summer of next year.
Potentially. I mean, look, so CBI, Confederation of British Industry, they're saying 6 or 7% inflation during the whole of 2023. Now, that could be 6 or 7% inflation, throughout 2023, or it could be, 10 or 11% inflation.
And then it goes,
in the first half of the year, and then 3 or 4% inflation in the second half of the year. It's the tyranny of averages, we say in statistics. The average often doesn't tell you the whole picture. And it does, in terms of the impact on wage inflation, you're exactly right. A lot of the government negotiators and business negotiators sitting on the opposite side of the table from employees and trade unions will be thinking, well, where's inflation going to go next year? So if I'm offering 6%, that may actually be an above inflation price.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're saying to the unions, look, take 6% because you may, and I'll hold you for next year, so we're both sharing the risk of where inflation will be, because this is meant to be a joint enterprise.
Therefore, this discussion with the NHS, perhaps, as Steve Barclay wants, a one-off payment for this year, and then we'll see where we are.
A lot of employers are doing the one-off payment, because the thing about a one-off payment, it only lasts, by definition, for 1 year. If I give you an extra 2% on your wages now, I have to pay you that forever.
Yeah.
Because I can't cut your wages.
And the national insurance on top of everything else.
There you go.
Yeah. OK, so a little bit of cheer, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit of cheer, maybe.
Thank you for that. Always nice to have a present. Well, Christmas week, yes, is finally upon us, with a mad rush, as usual, to find the presents, wrap them, and perhaps even if you can find a turkey. But with a Yuletide of strikes, debts and bills, are we actually in mood for Christmas? South West of England reporter Jeff Moody's been finding out whether it is festive as usual or something a bit different this year.
'Twas the week before Christmas and money was tight. But one house in Bristol said, let there be light. With money so scarce and strikes on our door, many are saying, don't do less, let's do more. The high streets are heaving, our cash flowing fast. But just like the snow, our good cheer won't last. Our January bills are not far away, but till then these shoppers will shop, come what may.
It's wonderful, actually, post-lockdown, to come out and see people, the vibrancy of the high street, life, face-to-face interactions. There's something deeply damaging about living a life on screen, online, and not having human contact.
When you come out for the day, it's like an event as much as just coming to do the shopping. So you see the lights, it's the atmosphere, nice coffee somewhere. So it's like an event, a day out.
At Padstow, the market is festive with cheer. They're selling their stock of good wine, gin and beer.
We've still found that the spend has actually been about, on average, the same as what we normally do, which has been good.
Are you spending as much money as you normally do at Christmas?
Probably.
These events, maybe people have been saving all year, so they've got the money to spend, but food's a bit different, isn't it? Because you can eat it, whereas gifts, it's a bit like, oh, are you going to have it or not?
The reshuffled royals are out there in force, spreading good cheer till the carolers are hoarse.
I'd just like to wish you all a very, very happy Christmas.
Christmas is not about bills, it's for hope. So give to Ukraine and feel good, says the Pope.
The world is a different place. There's a lot going on out there, and I think people are very reflective. And I think that, we all have to be careful, and I think there's nothing wrong with that, providing you think about the things that you purchase,
Our warm Christmas dreams are keeping us sane. This 90-year-old lady is flying a plane. She's lived through hard times. She knows how it's done. If you're cash-strapped at Christmas, make memories with Mum. The British won't let a small problem or two become insurmountable. That's not what we do. So whatever your budget for gifts, food and booze, have a great Christmas. From Jeff, GB News.
He's a poet and you don't know it. Excellent. Merry Christmas. Anyway, coming up, we'll be updating you on events in the Commons. We've got Home Office questions or statements coming up because Suella Braverman
Minister, agree with me.
is going to be making a statement at about 3:30, we expect, on this decision by the High Court. It has ruled that the government's Rwanda policy is actually legal. Home Secretary saying she's committed to making the plan to send migrants to Rwanda work after that High Court ruling, saying the relocation is consistent with the Refugee Convention, and Ms Braverman saying that she welcomed that decision and would be unable to guarantee whether any flights would depart in 2023, but the government stands ready to defend any further legal challenges. More coming up in the next hour. Stay with us.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. You've probably noticed it's a lot milder out there. It's also wetter and windier than it has been, and wet and windy weather usually means low pressure is nearby. We've got a big one here and it is spiralling round, gusty winds and weather fronts bringing areas of rain across pretty much all parts. We'll certainly see some heavier rain overnight across parts of the south. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place covering parts of southern England, but much of the Midlands